The chalk squeaked across the green board as Professor Elijah Granger stepped back, arms folded, eyes narrowed with theatrical intensity. The lecture hall at Harvard's Jefferson Hall was packed. Students leaned forward, pens gripped, breaths held, like they were watching a magician set up his final trick. "There it is," he said, tapping the board. "A problem unsolved since 1952. 6 pages of dense notation. 5 Fields medalists have tried. Every attempt has collapsed under its own weight." The room fell into a hush. This wasn't just any equation, this was the kind of math that humbled genius. Granger turned slowly. "The Kessler conjecture. Solve it, and your name will live forever in mathematical history. Or," he smirked, "you can be like everyone else and walk away." Laughter broke out. Nervous, forced. He always did this, dropping a bomb at the end of class like a mic drop. The equation stayed on the board like a challenge written in fire. Then he walked out, coat slung over one shoulder, and left the puzzle glaring back at 120 students who had no clue where to even begin. Across campus, in the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the stale coffee air of the graduate lounge, Anna, one of Granger's TAs, opened her inbox. Subject: Kessler conjecture, potential proof. From E. Walker at notrace.org. Attachment: KesslerSolution.pdf. Her brows knit. No affiliation. No institutional email. No signature. Just a plain text message. "I think I saw a pattern no one else did. Maybe it's wrong. But maybe it's not." Skeptical but curious, Anna opened the PDF. Then her heart skipped. Not just because the logic made sense, but because it made terrifying, impossible sense. She didn't understand how yet, but it felt elegant. Like the kind of math that made your skin tingle. She forwarded it to Granger without even thinking. The next morning, Professor Granger stood at his desk, brows furrowed so tightly they could snap steel. "Where did this come from?" he asked Anna, holding the printout like it might catch fire. "No idea," she said. "Anonymous email. Name says E. Walker. That's it." "Anyone could fake this," he muttered, pacing. "Could be a prank. Could be AI-generated garbage." "Except it's not," Anna said softly. "You know it's not. You've been trying this problem for 20 years. Has anyone ever gotten that far?" Granger sat. He ran his fingers along the margins, his eyes scanning the notation again. Something about it, the structure, the fluidity, it didn't feel artificial. It felt human. Honest. Raw. He glanced up. "Find this Walker. I want to talk to him. Or her." Anna was already typing. Meanwhile, 2,200 miles south, on the edge of Brownsville, Texas, Eli Walker sat cross-legged on the creaky wooden floor of his aunt's trailer, surrounded by scraps of paper and old spiral notebooks. The lights flickered. The AC coughed and gave up. But Eli didn't notice. He was watching the email he had sent, open in a tab. No reply. Nothing. He closed the laptop slowly. Maybe they didn't care. Maybe they thought it was a joke. Or maybe he really was wrong. He'd been wrong before. Dozens of times. Hundreds. But this one felt different. It had come to him in the middle of the night, the way dreams do when they aren't dreams. Like seeing constellations in spilled cereal. Like hearing music in chaos. He sighed and pulled down the window blinds. Outside, the sun baked the dry, cracked yard, and the sound of Border Patrol helicopters buzzed faintly in the distance. He didn't want fame. He just wanted to be seen. Back at Harvard, Anna had finally traced the IP address. Or, tried to. No institutional link. No school record. No academic ID, she said. But the IP pings from a library branch in Brownsville, Texas. Granger frowned. Brownsville? Yeah. Border town. Mostly immigrants. Rural. Low income. He looked back at the printed proof again. You telling me the person who cracked a 70-year-old mathematical riddle, did it in a public library next to a rack of magazines and a broken printer? Anna shrugged. Stranger things have happened. Granger stared at the board. At his chalk. At the future rewriting itself under his nose. The next day, Eli's inbox blinked. Subject, urgent, your Kessler submission. From anna.reed@harvard.edu. Mr. Walker. Your proof has caught the attention of Professor Granger and the department. We would like to speak with you, virtually or in person, at your earliest availability. Please respond at your soonest convenience. This may change everything. Eli read the email 3 times. His hands shook. His first instinct was to delete it. Then run. Because this wasn't just about math anymore. If Harvard saw him, really saw him, they'd know. No birth certificate. No passport. No legal status. No permission to even be in this country. He stared at the cursor blinking in the reply box. Should he tell them the truth? Should he vanish? Instead, he typed. Thank you. I'm honored. I don't have a webcam or reliable internet at home, but I can come in person if needed. Just let me know the details. He hit send. And that's when it all began. Hit subscribe and comment where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Brownsville wasn't on most maps that mattered. The sun hung low and angry above the rows of rust-colored trailers and dust-caked fences. It was the kind of town where you didn't ask too many questions, especially not about where someone came from or where they were going. People here moved in silence, shadowed by the line that split 2 countries and too many families. Eli Walker was one of those shadows. He walked through town like a ghost, quiet, careful, and unnoticed. That's how it had to be. Every teacher, every nurse, every clerk could be the wrong person to trust. One phone call, one loose word, and he could disappear forever. And no one would be able to prove he was ever here. Keep your head down, Aunt Rosa used to say. Low eyes, low voice. The law doesn't care if you're a genius. It only cares if you exist on paper. Eli existed on paper only in his notebooks. Math notebooks, filled with scribbled symbols, rewritten equations, half solutions and imagined problems. He wrote in them like they were diaries, the only safe place his mind could stretch and run. He wasn't allowed in school. No papers, no enrollment. But the San Felipe Library didn't ask questions. It had 3 dusty computers with cracked monitors and a back room where the AC worked half the time. That was where Eli lived most days, curled up between encyclopedias and outdated physics texts, his earbuds in, absorbing calculus lectures and linear algebra breakdowns from YouTube channels he couldn't pronounce. He remembered the first time he solved something that didn't come from a book. He was 13. The librarian, Mr. Jasso, had tossed out a puzzle from an old Scientific American issue, half joking. Bet you $5 you can't figure this one out, he'd said, grinning. Eli had nodded, took the page, and returned 10 minutes later with a napkin full of scribbles and the correct answer. After that, Mr. Jasso started leaving math challenges at the desk, like breadcrumbs. No one else ever noticed. No one else ever tried. There was a difference between learning math and feeling math. Eli didn't just memorize formulas. He saw relationships. He could stare at a sequence of numbers and feel a hum in his chest when something didn't fit. Patterns whispered to him. Prime numbers felt sharp. Squares were warm. Fractals made him dizzy but euphoric. But all of it existed in secret. His aunt worked 2 jobs, one cleaning motels, the other folding clothes at a laundromat across town. She didn't understand his obsession, but she left the light on when he stayed up past midnight, solving problems he printed from the library. Sometimes she brought him books from garage sales. Sometimes she cried when she thought he couldn't hear her. Eli never knew his mother well. She died of pneumonia when he was 10. She had cleaned houses during the day and read to him in Spanish at night. She once told him he had el alma vieja, an old soul. His father had been taken when Eli was 8. ICE agents had shown up at dawn. No warning. Just knocking that turned into pounding. His father was handcuffed in front of him. That night, Eli stared at the empty seat across the table and felt the silence dig into his chest like glass. After that, he stopped talking in school. Stopped raising his hand. Stopped showing up. That's when Aunt Rosa took him in. "Me Joe," she said one night, cupping his face in her rough hands, "you can be anything in this world. Just not visible. But even shadows crave light." At 17, Eli's curiosity was a hunger. He had read papers from MIT, Stanford, Cambridge. Half of them he couldn't understand, but he kept trying. He'd print them out, underline unfamiliar terms, and go back to learn the words. One day, he stumbled onto the Kessler conjecture in an old online math journal. The paper didn't explain much, just called it a problem no one has solved since 1952, and listed some failed attempts. It didn't feel impossible to him. It felt forgotten. Like a story someone stopped telling because they were too scared to finish it. He read everything he could find on it. Spent weeks building a visual model from scratch, rearranging the variables like gears in a machine. It became an obsession, bigger than meals, bigger than sleep, bigger than fear. He had no degree. No transcripts. No resume. But that night, under the whine of a dying ceiling fan, Eli finished the proof. 6 pages. 1 pencil. A cracked desk. He scanned it using a library printer, typed up a short email, and sent it. No school email. No credentials. Just his initials. E. Walker. Then he closed the laptop and waited for the world to do nothing. It had been 3 days since he sent it. 3 days of checking his inbox like it owed him a heartbeat. Nothing. He'd almost convinced himself it had disappeared into the digital void. But then. A ping. A reply. His stomach flipped. Eli. Aunt Rosa's voice snapped through the trailer. He rushed into the living room. She held up a wrinkled manila envelope, no return address. Inside was a single printed letter. From Harvard. An invitation. Rosa looked at him with wide, terrified eyes. "What did you do?" I think I solved something," he whispered. "I think they want to talk." She grabbed his hands. "You can't go. You'll get arrested. You'll get disappeared." "I know," he said. "But they saw me. Rosa, they saw me." For once in his life, someone out there had seen him, not as a risk, or a burden, or a shadow, but as a mind. A mind that mattered. That night, Eli sat in the back room of the library, staring at the email again. He had no ID. No passport. No social security number. Just an old school library card with his name on it, expired 3 years ago. The decision burned in his chest. Go, and risk everything. Or stay, and remain invisible forever. Somewhere outside, a border patrol vehicle passed slowly, spotlight sweeping across the field. Eli didn't flinch. He was already used to living in the dark. But now he had a chance to step into the light. At first, the books came in paper bags. Aunt Rosa would return from her job at the motel with a grease-stained sack full of old paperbacks someone left behind, romance novels, crime thrillers, and occasionally, textbooks half covered in ink or gum. She didn't know what she was bringing home. She just knew Eli read like breathing, and when he read, he was still. One day, buried beneath a stack of yellowed cookbooks and a water-damaged Bible, Eli found a calculus workbook. It was torn, scribbled in, half the pages missing. He devoured it. Not because someone told him to. Not because there was a test. But because the formulas felt like riddles wrapped in rhythm, like music, if music used Greek letters and demanded blood. He didn't have a teacher. He didn't have a curriculum. What he had was stolen time. Eli learned early how to take what wasn't freely given. He couldn't walk into a school building without risking a call to ICE. But the San Felipe Library was open, and its back door didn't always lock. He figured that out when he was 11. By 12, he was sneaking in after closing time, flashlight in hand, sitting cross-legged between shelves of forgotten science journals and ancient math competitions from decades past. He taught himself multiplication tables using broken bingo chips. He learned fractions using recipes from the back of soup cans. When he hit algebra, he'd stare at equations like they were constellations. Rearranging them, solving for x, watching the balance. Something about the symmetry soothed him. The library's computer lab had a 30-minute timer per session, but Mr. Jasso, the night librarian, always let Eli reset it when no one was watching. "You didn't get this from me," he'd say with a wink, walking away. By 13, Eli had discovered Khan Academy, then MIT OpenCourseWare, then the dark corners of Reddit threads filled with math nerds and retired professors arguing about theories no one taught in classrooms. He didn't just learn formulas. He learned how people thought. He started noticing patterns in their mistakes. Some would jump too fast to an assumption. Others would get stuck repeating methods that clearly weren't working. Eli learned to pause. Breathe. Ask questions the others didn't. He once rewrote an entire geometry proof just to try solving it backward. When it worked, he laughed so hard he cried. Not because it was right. But because it was new. The old couch in their trailer had 2 permanent indentations, one from Aunt Rosa, the other from Eli, knees tucked under him, notebook on his lap. He'd stay up late every night solving problems by hand, making up the ones he couldn't find in books. He made his own flashcards using cereal boxes. He memorized pi to 100 digits just because the repetition was comforting, like prayer. His notebooks were full of loops, diagrams, scribbled margins with phrases like, "What if infinity has a direction?" and "Mirror prime equals prime that reflects." One night, while Rosa folded laundry, she looked over and asked, "You still doing that number stuff?" "Yeah," he said, barely looking up. "Any of it useful?" "Probably not," he said with a shrug. "But it's beautiful." She didn't understand. But she smiled anyway. His first exposure to pure math came from a substitute priest. Father Luis had taken over Sunday service for a month when their regular pastor went on sabbatical. He was soft-spoken, half-blind, and wore sandals that always squeaked on the church floor. He caught Eli sketching in the margins of a hymn book. "What are you drawing, me Joe?" the priest asked gently. "Just a pattern." Luis squinted. "That looks like a Mobius strip." Eli blinked. "You know what that is? I used to teach topology at UNAM. Before, things changed." Father Luis took him seriously. Asked him questions. Gave him old textbooks from seminary storage, books with titles like Introduction to Set Theory and Abstract Algebra for the Curious. From then on, every Sunday after service, they'd sit in the back pew and talk math. Eli would show him his notebooks. Father Luis would smile, tap the page, and whisper, "You think differently. That's a gift. Don't bury it." But even gifts come with a price. Eli never used his real name online. He created accounts under aliases, E. Walker 23, X Equinox, Rational Nomad. Every time he posted a solution on a math forum or joined a chat, he wiped his browser history. Aunt Rosa had drilled it into him, Never tell them where you are. Never give your full name. Never trust the cloud. So when a Stanford PhD student once replied to one of his answers with, "Hey, what school are you at?" "That's an insanely elegant solution," Eli never responded. He couldn't afford to. At 15, Eli got bold. He hacked a printer at the community center and printed out his first college-level problem set, Real Analysis, Volume 1, 67 pages. Cost him a week's worth of library credits. He didn't sleep for 2 nights. Every solution was an itch under his skin. Every theorem was a maze with invisible walls. And when he got stuck, he didn't Google the answer. He stared out the window. Watched the way tree branches split. Thought about how rivers curved. How veins in his hands resembled lightning. And then, it would come to him. Not like thunder. But like music. One night, he asked Father Luis, "Do you think math is from God?" The priest chuckled. "I think God gave us math so we wouldn't forget that the universe was built with order, not accident." "But it feels alive," Eli said. "Like it wants to be found." Father Luis nodded. "Maybe it does." By 17, Eli was juggling second-order differential equations, combinatorics, and graph theory. He didn't know exactly what they meant in the academic world, but he knew how they made him feel. He felt infinite when he solved them. Not like a poor boy from a trailer park with no birth certificate. But like someone who mattered. Someone who existed. That's why, when he found the Kessler conjecture, he didn't freeze. He didn't tell himself it was too big. He knew the rules of the world wouldn't let him through the front door. But this? This was a side entrance. If no one saw the color of his skin, the town on his mail, the absence of a student ID, if they just saw the math, maybe they'd let him in. Just for a second. So he solved it. In 6 pages, he tore down 70 years of failure. Then he clicked send. And for the first time in his life, he waited to be seen. Father Luis leaned forward, squinting at the notebook spread across the chipped oak table. "This one?" he asked, tapping the upper corner of page 6. Eli nodded. That's where it finally clicked. The priest smiled, not in amusement, but in awe. He ran his hand slowly down the page, tracing loops of notation, symbols stacked like poetry. It was long past sunset, and the rectory kitchen buzzed with the dull hum of an old refrigerator. They were alone, save for the flickering light bulb above the stove. "How long did this take you?" Father Luis asked. 6 weeks. Maybe 7. I kept restarting, Eli said. The pattern didn't make sense at first. Then I realized, I was solving it the same way everyone else had. I had to stop thinking like a student. Father Luis raised an eyebrow. And start thinking like a pioneer. Eli grinned, sheepishly. More like a trespasser. The priest leaned back, sighing. Eli, what you did here, this isn't just clever. It's historic. Do you understand that? You solved a problem that's buried giants. I think it might be wrong, Eli said quietly. There's probably something I missed. Father Luis gave him a look, the kind only an old man of both science and faith could master. You always doubt yourself. That's part of your genius. Eli looked down at the notebook. He had rewritten the proof 3 times in 3 different formats. Traditional derivation. Visual model. Simplified logic progression. He even color-coded sections, yellow for theorems, blue for sequences, red for variables with potential instability. But none of it changed the truth, this was his. He had done what entire departments had failed to do in 70 years. And yet, his hands still trembled when he flipped the page. I want to send it somewhere, Eli said finally, his voice barely louder than the hum of the fridge. To someone who would know if it's real. If it matters. Father Luis leaned in. Who? Harvard, Eli whispered. There's a professor, Granger. He just gave a talk about it. They recorded the lecture. I watched it 6 times. He said no one would ever solve it. A slow smile spread across the priest's face. Well. That's a challenge if I've ever heard one. But I don't know how to do it. I don't have an .edu address. I can't send it from a school email. I can't even use my real name. They'll never take it seriously. Father Luis was silent for a moment. Then, softly, do it anyway. Eli blinked. But. Do it, the priest repeated. Because if you don't, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you had. And I won't let this world bury you in obscurity just because it's too blind to see brilliance from the wrong zip code. Eli exhaled. So I just, send it? You already did the impossible, hijo. Now you just need to be brave. That night, Eli walked home under a sky smeared with stars. He looked up and whispered a quiet prayer, not for success, not for praise. Just to be seen. Seen not as a problem, not as a border kid, not as a mistake in a system that never made room for him, but as a mind. He stayed up till 2 a.m., formatting the document in LibreOffice on the library's borrowed laptop. He double-checked every equation, reread every proof, rearranged it for clarity, then added a single line at the top. I'm not a student. I'm not a professor. I'm just someone who sees things differently. I hope this helps. He signed it. E. Walker. Then he created a throwaway email, e.walker@notrace.org. And hit send. For the next 2 days, he was a ghost again. Except this time, it wasn't just the law that made him invisible, it was doubt. Doubt gnawed at him constantly. Every time his inbox stayed empty, every hour that passed without a reply, it screamed. You were wrong. You were foolish. You were just playing smart. But then. The email came. From Harvard. From someone named Anna Reed. At the church, Father Luis read the email over his shoulder. He didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, he smiled softly and whispered, So. They saw you. Eli nodded. They want to talk. Will you go? Eli hesitated. I want to. But, it's Harvard. I don't belong there. I don't even belong here. You belong in every room your mind can carry you into, the priest said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. The question isn't whether you belong. It's whether the world's ready for someone like you. What if they find out? Eli said, voice shaking. What if they ask for papers? ID? What if? Father Luis reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a worn rosary. This belonged to my brother, he said. He was undocumented too. He crossed 3 borders to get here. He never got papers. But he built a family. A business. A life. He placed the rosary in Eli's hand. Take it with you, he said. Let it remind you that you carry more than fear. You carry legacy. Eli closed his fingers around it. For the first time, the fear didn't feel like chains. It felt like weight he could bear. The next morning, Eli stood at the Greyhound station with a backpack, his proof printed and folded into a manila folder, tucked between 3 notebooks and a change of clothes. Aunt Rosa hugged him so hard he couldn't breathe. You be careful, Mijo, she said, tears streaking her cheeks. And remember, you don't owe them anything. You are not lucky to be seen. They are lucky to have found you. Eli swallowed the lump in his throat. He boarded the bus. As the engine rumbled to life, and the desert rolled by outside, he opened his notebook and began writing again, not for school, not for grades, but for the joy of chasing something beautiful, and the hope that, somewhere ahead, someone might finally understand. When the Greyhound pulled into Boston, the city hit Eli like a second language. Everything moved faster. The people. The taxis. The wind. Even the pigeons seemed to carry somewhere important to be. Towering glass buildings reflected clouds like a dream half remembered, and the sidewalks buzzed with a kind of silent competition, shoes tapping like metronomes to ambition. Eli stepped off the bus with one backpack, a notebook in his hand, and enough anxiety to power a small country. This wasn't just a new place. This was another planet. Harvard didn't look real at first. The brick buildings. The columns. The wide-open courtyards dotted with students who looked like they were born wearing cardigans and carrying debate trophies. It was the kind of place he'd seen in movies, the kind of place where people spoke Latin for fun and drank coffee with words like dissertation and sabbatical floating over their heads. Eli stood at the gates and hesitated. There was no badge around his neck. No visitor's pass. He didn't belong here, not by bloodline, not by paperwork, not by zip code. But something kept his feet from turning around. A whisper. You've already done what none of them could. He took a breath and stepped through the gates. Anna Reed met him at the admissions building. She was younger than he expected, maybe early 30s, sharp blue eyes, and the kind of walk that said she had no time for nonsense. She wore a Harvard lanyard, a slight frown, and carried a manila folder tucked under her arm. The same manila folder he'd scanned and sent 3 weeks ago. "E. Walker?" she asked. He nodded, heart thudding. "Call me Anna," she said, shaking his hand. "Come on, Granger wants to meet you." He cancelled 2 classes for this. Eli blinked. He did. First time he's cancelled anything in 8 years. Professor Charles Granger looked like every math genius Eli had ever imagined, wild white hair, glasses perched halfway down his nose, and a dry erase marker permanently stained on one hand. His office was a controlled mess of books, blackboards, and half-erased equations. He didn't greet Eli. Didn't ask where he was from. Didn't offer a seat. He just turned from the board and said, "You're not a student." "Not officially." "No, sir." "You submitted under a fake email." "Yes." "You solved the Kessler conjecture." Eli hesitated. "I think so." Granger crossed the room in 3 long steps, opened Eli's folder, and slapped the printout on the desk. "I didn't believe it," he said. "Checked it 5 times. Ran simulations. It holds." Eli swallowed. "That's good." "That's insane." The professor paced, muttering to himself, then turned. "Who taught you this?" "No one." "You mean self-taught?" "No," Eli said. "I mean no one. I didn't go to school. I wasn't allowed to." Granger squinted. "Why not?" Eli took a breath. "I'm undocumented." Silence. Heavy. Sharp. Final. Anna flinched. Granger didn't. Instead, he looked at Eli like a new theorem had just dropped into his lap. "You're 17. Almost 18. You built a visual proof of a 70-year problem without instruction, without mentorship, and without ever setting foot in a real classroom?" "Yes, sir." The old professor ran a hand down his face. "Jesus Christ." They sat. For 2 hours. Granger grilled him, line by line through the proof, pushing, questioning, challenging. He tried to poke holes, but Eli was ready. Every variable, every limit, every summation, he'd rewritten them a dozen ways in his head long before this moment. Anna sat in the corner, silent, her eyes darting back and forth like she was watching history unfold. Finally, Granger leaned back, rubbed his temple, and said, "You didn't just solve the problem, son. You changed how we understand the structure beneath the problem." Eli blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means you're not just right. You're original." Later, outside the building, Anna walked Eli toward the quad. "You okay?" she asked. Eli nodded. I think so. Is he always like that? He once made a grad student cry over a decimal point. Oh. Cool. She laughed. He likes you. He didn't say that. That was him saying it. Eli smiled. Then stopped. Because they were passing a group of students in pressed coats, headphones, and lanyards. They looked like they belonged here, fluent in every language Eli had never been taught: privilege, confidence, security. He felt his breath catch. Anna, he said quietly. I'm not supposed to be here. She turned to him. You're right, she said softly. You're not. His heart sank. But, she continued, that doesn't mean we're going to let that stop you. That afternoon, they sat in a private room inside the graduate math lounge. A lawyer joined them, someone from the Harvard Immigration Initiative. Anna laid it out simply. There's a way forward, she said. But it's going to be complicated. You don't have papers. No birth certificate. No passport. You're a ghost in the system. That means we have to get creative. Eli nodded slowly. We'll start with a pro bono legal team, she said. If we can get you some kind of documented identity, maybe a humanitarian pathway, we could get you temporary residency status. What does that mean? It means there's a chance, she said. Not a guarantee. But a chance. Eli looked down at the table. I've lived invisible for so long, he whispered. It's hard to believe someone might actually fight for me. Anna didn't smile. She just said, then let us be the first. That night, Eli sat in a tiny dorm guest room overlooking the campus green. He wasn't a student. Not yet. He wasn't safe. Not yet. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't alone. He opened his notebook, turned to a blank page, and wrote. Day 1. Harvard. I might not belong here. But I will not leave unnoticed. The first week at Harvard was a blur of emails, legal documents, and whispered conversations behind closed doors. Eli spent his days with Anna Reed, meeting lawyers, and trying to find a way to prove his existence without revealing too much about his past. Every step forward felt like a risk, every moment in the spotlight felt like a lie, but the world around him was changing, and so was he. His nights were quieter. In his small, windowless dorm room, he studied the Kessler conjecture, reworking the proof over and over. He didn't need a classroom or a professor to teach him, he had learned to listen to the quiet hum of the universe, to find the hidden patterns in the chaos. But as much as the quiet nights gave him peace, the daytime, especially when he had to interact with Harvard students, was anything but peaceful. It was Thursday when the first incident happened. Eli was sitting in the student commons, tapping at his laptop. He was working on a separate set of problems, not related to the Kessler conjecture, trying to get some distance from the madness of the past few days. The low hum of conversation around him felt like a distant buzz, but it was a buzz he could never escape. He didn't notice the students at the next table until one of them spoke up. Hey, are you that guy? The one who solved the Kessler conjecture? Eli's heart skipped a beat. He turned, looking at the 3 students who had gathered around his table. They weren't smiling. Their eyes were sharp, calculating. Eli said, adjusting his glasses. I don't know about that. I mean, I'm just. No, we've seen your paper, the girl in the front said. You're the one who emailed Granger. What's your deal? Eli didn't respond right away. He wasn't used to being called out like this, especially not in a place like this, Harvard, where the students all seemed to know exactly who they were and what they were supposed to do. He had never been part of that world. I'm just here to learn, Eli said carefully, keeping his tone neutral. I'm not looking for attention. The guy beside her snorted. Yeah, sure. But you're getting attention whether you want it or not. You realize that, right? Eli felt his palms sweat. We were just talking about it earlier, the other guy added, tapping his fingers on the table. Some of the proofs you used? They're weird. Almost like you skipped over steps. So, what, you're really just gonna show up here and act like you're some kind of genius? Eli could feel the weight of their judgment pressing in. They didn't believe in him. To them, he was an outsider, a fraud. I'm just doing the best I can, Eli said, his voice shaking slightly. I didn't mean to. Oh, you're doing the best you can, the girl cut in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. You don't belong here. You're not like us. Eli's chest tightened. The words felt like daggers, cutting straight through the fragile armor he had built around himself. I know you think you're smart, the guy said, standing up. But I don't think you have what it takes. People like you don't get into places like this. Not without a pedigree. Not without connections. The words hung in the air like a challenge. A gauntlet thrown down at his feet. Eli didn't know how to respond. He didn't have the words, the defense, the training. He had just the proof he had created, the faith that this was his path, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, he could show them wrong. That night, Eli sat alone in his dorm room, the dim light of his desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls. He had tried to push the encounter out of his mind, but the words stuck to him like glue. People like you don't belong here. It wasn't just about them. It was about everything he had fought for. It was about his identity, his place in the world, the constant, gnawing feeling that at any moment, someone would figure out he didn't belong. He opened his notebook and stared at the Kessler conjecture. Was it really that easy? Was it too simple, too obvious? Did he just get lucky? But then he remembered Father Luis's words, the ones that had carried him here in the first place. You don't need anyone's approval to be who you are. You are already enough. Eli closed his eyes. He didn't need anyone's validation. He had already proven it once. And he could prove it again. The next day, Professor Granger asked him to meet him in his office again. You did well yesterday, Granger said, his voice curt but not unkind. But you'll need to do better than well if you want to survive here. Survive? Eli asked, raising an eyebrow. Granger turned to face him, his hands behind his back. There's a difference between solving a problem and proving that you belong. You've solved the conjecture, Eli, but the world doesn't care about that unless you can show them why it matters. I thought I already did, Eli said, his voice low. You did, Granger said, nodding. But now comes the hard part. There are those who will always question you. There are always doubters, always critics. It doesn't matter that you have the answer. What matters is that you have the conviction to stand by it, even when everyone else tries to tear you down. Eli stood a little taller. You have to prove yourself over and over again, Eli. Not just to them, but to yourself. Eli's second week at Harvard was a game of survival. He walked into the lecture hall for his first math class, his nerves frayed from a night of restless thinking. The students were sitting in tight clusters, whispering to each other. A few looked his way as he entered. He felt the eyes on him before he even sat down. The professor, Dr. Bennett, was already writing on the board, but paused when Eli took a seat in the back. Ah, he said, pushing up his glasses. We have a visitor. Eli Walker, the genius who solved Kessler. Care to share how you did it? The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Eli felt the pressure build. This was his moment. He could either shrink into the corner and let the rumors define him, or he could stand up and show them the truth. I'd be happy to, Eli said, his voice steady. But first, I want to show you something even more important than the answer. Eli stood in front of the blackboard, staring at the chalk in his hand. The class had quieted down, the murmurs replaced by the thick, uncomfortable silence of anticipation. Every student was watching him now, eyes sharp, judgmental. Even Dr. Bennett, the professor, had set down his marker and leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "Well," Dr. Bennett said, breaking the silence. "Let's see if you can back up the hype, Eli. Show us what you've got." Eli felt the weight of their stares pressing down on him. He had been in this position before, standing at the edge, uncertain, with nothing but his mind to carry him forward. The difference now was that this time, he didn't just have a theory. He had the proof. And in a room full of Harvard students and a renowned professor, that proof had better stand up to scrutiny. He took a deep breath and walked to the board. The chalk felt foreign in his hand, not because he didn't know how to write, but because of the significance behind each stroke. Each symbol he drew could either validate him or doom him. The Kessler conjecture had always been something more than just a mathematical problem. It was a door to a new way of thinking, a puzzle that had been unsolvable for decades. When Eli had first solved it, he hadn't understood the magnitude of what he had done. Now, standing before this group of brilliant minds, he realized that the real test wasn't about getting the right answer, it was about proving that he deserved to be here. "Okay," he said, writing the first part of the proof on the board. The numbers, the variables, the intricate relationships between them, they felt like home. He'd spent sleepless nights on this. He'd dreamed about it. And now, as he wrote the equations, they seemed to come alive, each line building on the last, like a living organism. Dr. Bennett didn't interrupt. Eli kept his focus, blocking out the heavy gaze of the room. It wasn't long before the first question came. "That's a nice setup," one of the students, a tall guy with dark hair, said. "But what happens when you reach the intersection of two variables? Have you accounted for the singularity there?" Eli paused. He'd expected questions. He had anticipated this. But the specific question caught him off guard. He hadn't fully worked out that intersection in the depth he'd wanted. For a split second, doubt crept into his mind. What if he hadn't thought of everything? What if this was where it all fell apart? He pushed the doubt aside. "Good question," Eli replied. "Let me walk you through it." He began writing again, showing how the intersection didn't present a singularity, but rather a new dimension in the solution, an asymptote that had been previously overlooked. His hand moved more confidently now, the chalk flowing freely across the board as the room watched in stunned silence. As he finished the explanation, he felt a rush of satisfaction. It wasn't just that he had answered the question. It was that he had done so in a way that proved he understood the deeper structure of the problem, not just the surface-level answer. He turned to the class. "You see, the key here is not just the solution, but understanding the way these variables interact," Eli said, his voice stronger now, more assured. "It's about seeing the patterns beneath the numbers. Mathematics is not just about answers. It's about how we ask the questions." Dr. Bennett stood up and walked over to the board. He studied the equations, his fingers tapping against his chin. The tension in the room was palpable. Eli could feel his heart pounding, every muscle tense with the weight of the moment. After a long pause, Dr. Bennett turned to the class. "It's unorthodox," he said slowly. "But it holds. I'll give you that." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Some students exchanged skeptical glances, while others seemed genuinely impressed. Eli felt a flicker of relief, like a tiny light in the distance. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. He could feel it, there was still something they weren't ready to accept. The doubts, the criticisms, they would come. They always came. And no matter how strong his proof was, no matter how sound his logic, there was one thing he hadn't been able to account for, himself. That evening, as Eli walked back to his dorm, he couldn't shake the feeling of being on the edge of something big. But it wasn't the feeling of success. It was the feeling of exposure. Of vulnerability. He had answered the questions. He had proven his worth in front of a room full of Harvard's best and brightest. But the one thing he couldn't escape was the question he'd asked himself all along, was this enough to make them see him for who he was? Was this enough to make them see him as more than a fraud? The next few days were a blur of emails and whispered conversations. Dr. Bennett had recommended Eli for a special lecture series on mathematical breakthroughs. The recommendation felt like a victory, but also like another test. He wasn't sure if he was ready for that kind of exposure yet. Not after the way things had played out in class. And then there was Anna. She had been there, supporting him through every step. But Eli could see the uncertainty in her eyes too. She didn't say it, but he could feel it, even she was starting to wonder if he was truly cut out for this world. The pressure was mounting, and it wasn't just from the students or the professors. It was coming from within. That night, Eli sat on his bed with his notebook open, staring at the blank page. He had already solved the problem. He had proved himself in front of the academic elite. But none of it felt like enough. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from Anna. Eli, they want you to give a talk next month. They want you to present your work at the symposium. You're going to need to prepare. I know you're scared, but you've got this. Eli read the message over and over. It wasn't just an opportunity. It was a chance to prove everything, to himself, to everyone. But it was also a challenge, a pressure unlike anything he had ever felt before. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't run from it. He couldn't let the doubt stop him. He would stand in front of that crowd, and he would show them everything he had worked for. He wouldn't just solve the problem, he would change the way they saw it. Eli took a deep breath, closed his notebook, and looked out the window. The lights of Harvard glowed softly in the distance, like beacons calling him forward. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: the journey was just beginning. The day of the symposium was fast approaching, and with each passing moment, Eli felt the weight of the world pressing harder on his shoulders. It wasn't just about standing in front of a crowd and giving a talk. It was about proving, once and for all, that he belonged in this world, the world of Harvard, of genius, of groundbreaking mathematics. And he had to do it in front of some of the brightest minds in academia. The days were blurring together. He had barely slept, his mind constantly running through equations, simulations, and every possible way his presentation could fail. The anxiety gnawed at him, an ever-present companion. He felt like a tightrope walker on the edge of a precipice, knowing that one wrong step could send him tumbling into disaster. Anna had been trying to help, of course. She kept reminding him to breathe, to step back and take it one step at a time. But it wasn't that simple. This wasn't just another class presentation. This was everything. Every doubt, every worry he'd ever had about his own worth was tied to this moment. If he failed here, he would prove them right, the critics, the skeptics, even his own fears. And he couldn't afford that. It was Thursday evening, just a few days before the symposium, when Eli reached his breaking point. He sat alone in his dorm room, the dim light of his desk lamp casting long shadows against the walls. His notebook was open, filled with half-scribbled notes and disorganized thoughts. The equations on the page had started to blur together, a web of symbols and numbers that felt as if they were mocking him. He had practiced his talk a dozen times, but each time he did, he felt more disconnected from the words. The numbers no longer seemed as beautiful as they once had. Instead, they were just numbers. And he was just him. A kid from nowhere, trying to convince a room full of Harvard professors that he was worth something. His hands shook as he stared at the paper. The pressure was suffocating. There was too much at stake. What if he couldn't do it? What if the weight of his past, the ghosts of his doubts, would crush him in front of everyone? He slammed his notebook shut, the noise echoing through the empty room. What am I doing here? He thought, pacing back and forth. I'm not one of them. I'm not cut out for this. They'll see right through me. He paused, hands on his hips, staring at his reflection in the small mirror on the wall. A wave of self-loathing washed over him. He didn't belong here. He never had. He remembered the conversation he had overheard that first week, in the student commons. The whispers behind his back, the criticisms, the judgment. They were right, weren't they? He was just a kid from a small town with a big idea, an idea that probably wasn't even his. Maybe he had gotten lucky, maybe it was just a fluke. The doubts were flooding his mind now, the suffocating realization that maybe he wasn't the genius everyone thought he was. Maybe he was just playing pretend. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. Eli didn't move. He didn't want to face anyone. He didn't want to talk, especially not to Anna. He didn't want to admit to her, or anyone, how badly he was falling apart inside. But the knock came again, more insistent this time. Eli, a voice called softly through the door. It's Anna. Please open up. Eli closed his eyes. He couldn't hide from her, not forever. He stood up slowly, his legs feeling heavy, and opened the door. Anna stood there, her face filled with concern, her eyes soft but steady. She wasn't pushing him, not yet. But Eli could see that she was waiting for him to say something, anything, to tell her what was going on inside his head. I don't know if I can do this, Eli said, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes were raw, and the weight of his insecurities felt unbearable. What if I fail? What if I go up there, and everything falls apart? Anna didn't say anything at first. She just stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind her. She moved to his desk, where the open notebook lay, and gently ran her fingers over the equations. You know what I see here? She asked, her voice calm, grounding. Eli didn't answer. He was afraid to look at her, afraid that if he did, he would crumble even more. I see a young man who has solved one of the most difficult problems in mathematics, Anna continued, her voice unwavering. I see someone who has worked harder than anyone I know to get here. And I see someone who is capable of so much more than he realizes. Eli felt his throat tighten, but he couldn't look away from her now. He had never heard her speak like this. It was as if her words were a lifeline thrown to him, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to reach for it. I don't know if I'm enough, he admitted, his voice shaking. I don't know if I'm really cut out for this. I'm just scared. All the time. Anna took a step closer to him, her eyes softening with empathy. Eli, it's okay to be scared. It's okay to feel like you're not enough sometimes. But you have to remember this, fear doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. She paused, letting her words sink in. You are here for a reason. You've earned your place at Harvard, and you've earned the right to stand in front of them. You're not pretending to be someone else, Eli. You are who you are. And that's enough. Eli swallowed hard, the lump in his throat threatening to choke him. The flood of emotion that had been building inside him for weeks was threatening to burst. But he held it back. Not yet. Not in front of her. I don't know if I can give this talk, he whispered. I don't know if I'm strong enough to face them. Anna smiled, a small, reassuring smile. You are. You're stronger than you think. And I'll be there, every step of the way. The next morning, Eli woke up feeling different. The darkness that had clouded his mind for the past few days had lifted, just a little. He wasn't cured. The doubts were still there, lingering in the background, but something had changed. Something inside him had shifted. He wasn't just doing this for Harvard, or for the recognition. He was doing this for himself. To prove that he could face his fears and still move forward. To show that he could stand in the face of doubt and find his strength. The symposium was the following afternoon, and Eli knew he couldn't back out now. He had made it this far. And even if it was terrifying, he wasn't going to let fear stop him. As he prepared for his talk, Eli took one last look at the equations in his notebook. The numbers that had haunted him for so long no longer felt like obstacles. They were just numbers. Part of the journey. Part of the story. And he was ready to tell that story. Eli stood backstage, just out of sight from the main auditorium, his hands clammy and his heart pounding. The cacophony of voices and the shuffle of feet outside seemed to echo louder with each passing second. His breath was shallow, the nerves from the days leading up to this moment now manifesting as an unrelenting anxiety in the pit of his stomach. His mind buzzed with the same questions that had plagued him since he first accepted the invitation. What if I fail? What if they don't believe me? What if they think I'm a fraud? He hadn't allowed himself to think about it this way until now, but the weight of the moment had finally hit him. This wasn't just another presentation. This was his moment. The culmination of all his hard work, all his sleepless nights, all the sacrifices he'd made to get to this point. It felt like every single doubt he'd ever had about himself was staring him in the face, daring him to falter. And it was too late to back out now. A deep breath. One step forward. Eli Vance, a voice called from the front of the auditorium, breaking his reverie. You're up. His stomach twisted. This was it. The moment he had both feared and longed for. He walked toward the stage, his legs feeling heavier with each step. As he reached the podium, he looked out into the audience. The room was filled with professors, scholars, and students, many of them experts in fields that Eli could only dream of mastering. His eyes swept over the crowd. Dr. Bennett sat near the front, arms folded, watching intently. Several of Eli's classmates from his toughest math courses were scattered throughout the room, some with eager, expectant looks on their faces, others with skepticism etched into their expressions. Eli cleared his throat, grabbed the microphone, and forced his legs to stay steady. He could feel his pulse racing in his ears. He had rehearsed this 100 times, but now, with all these eyes on him, the words seemed to blur together. He opened his mouth, but for a moment, no sound came out. The silence stretched, suffocating, before he regained his composure. Good afternoon, Eli began, his voice barely above a whisper. The crowd leaned in, sensing his nervousness. My name is Eli Vance, and today, I'm here to present my work on the Kessler conjecture. This is a problem that's been unsolved for decades, and, until recently, I believed it was unsolvable. But after years of research, I've developed a new approach that, I believe, not only solves the conjecture, but offers a new perspective on how we understand mathematical structures in higher dimensions. He paused, allowing the words to settle in the air. This was it. The hardest part was over, just saying it out loud. Eli adjusted his glasses and turned to the projector behind him, clicking to display his first slide. The board was filled with complex equations, formulas, and graphs that had once been nothing more than a tangled mess in his mind. Now they were clear, purposeful, each one a stepping stone leading to his ultimate conclusion. The room fell silent again. He could feel their gazes on him, critical, analytical, waiting for the breakthrough to either stand or crumble under their scrutiny. Eli launched into the first section of his presentation. He described the initial conditions of the Kessler conjecture, a long-standing problem in number theory that had stumped some of the most brilliant minds in mathematics. He explained how the conjecture had been an unsolvable puzzle, a riddle without an answer for decades. But Eli had found something, a pattern, a subtle relationship between the prime numbers and the higher dimensional spaces that no one had noticed before. As he spoke, he began to pick up speed. The equations flowed more naturally now, the steps between them growing more confident. Each point he made seemed to lead seamlessly into the next, and with each passing moment, his confidence grew, too. He could feel the skepticism in the room slowly start to shift. The furrowed brows from the front row relaxed. Dr. Bennett, the stern professor who had always been critical, was leaning forward now, scribbling notes furiously in his journal. For the first time since he had stepped onto the stage, Eli began to believe in himself. He wasn't just spouting equations or presenting theories. He was showing them something new, something that no one else had thought of. He was offering them an answer, a solution to a problem that had remained unsolved for so long. And it was his answer. The presentation continued, each slide revealing another layer of complexity. Eli showed how his approach worked, connecting seemingly unrelated concepts from higher-dimensional topology and abstract algebra. He illustrated how the interplay between these abstract concepts had allowed him to unlock a solution to the conjecture that had been considered impossible by so many. As he reached the final steps of his proof, he could see the audience shifting. Some of the professors were nodding, the smallest signs of agreement in their eyes. The students who had doubted him, whispering among themselves just a few minutes ago, were now focused, eyes wide, hanging on every word he said. But even as he reached the end of his talk, as he prepared to show his final proof, Eli couldn't stop the nagging feeling that lingered in the back of his mind. What if they still don't believe me? His hands trembled slightly as he pulled up the final slide, a clear, definitive formula, the culmination of years of work, the answer to the Kessler conjecture. It's simple, Eli said, taking a deep breath. This is the proof. The Kessler conjecture is true, and this is how we prove it. He stepped back from the projector, allowing the room to take in the magnitude of the moment. The silence was almost unbearable. The audience was processing, thinking, analyzing. They were quiet, but Eli knew they were grappling with the enormity of the breakthrough. Then, a voice cut through the stillness. You're sure this holds? Dr. Bennett's voice rang out from the front row, calm yet carrying a weight of authority. Eli nodded, more certain now than he had been when he first solved the problem. Yes. This approach has been verified through multiple tests and simulations. The relationships between the variables hold consistently across all dimensional calculations. This isn't just theory. It's fact. Dr. Bennett stood up, his face unreadable as he walked slowly toward the front of the stage. For a moment, Eli's heart skipped a beat. Was this the moment everything unraveled? But then Dr. Bennett smiled, a rare sight for the intimidating professor. Well then, I think we may have something truly groundbreaking here. The room erupted into applause. Eli stood frozen for a moment, the adrenaline coursing through him. His ears rang with the sound of clapping. The applause wasn't just polite. It was real. It was earned. It was validation. As Eli walked off the stage, his mind was spinning. He had done it. He had presented his work, and more importantly, he had proven it. He had proven to them, to himself, that he was worthy of this place. And as he made his way down the steps, Anna was waiting for him at the bottom, her eyes bright, her face beaming with pride. You did it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Eli couldn't help but smile. Yeah. I think I did. The applause still echoed in Eli's ears as he made his way off the stage, but the noise of the moment quickly faded as reality settled back in. The weight of the spotlight had lifted from his shoulders, but a new, unexpected pressure began to take its place. The symposium had been a resounding success, but Eli wasn't sure what to do next. The questions that followed his talk were no longer about the conjecture itself. They were about him. Eli, someone called from behind him. He turned to see Professor Bennett, his stern face now softened with an expression Eli had never seen before, one that could almost be described as admiration. You've done something extraordinary here, Dr. Bennett said, his voice low and controlled. But this is just the beginning. The world will be watching now, Eli. We'll be expecting more. Don't let this be your peak. Eli froze for a moment, his heart racing. The world will be watching. He had never thought of it that way before. It had been about proving himself to the people in the room, to his professors, his classmates, and, most importantly, to himself. But the reality of being thrust into the public eye hadn't fully hit him yet. I'll do my best, Eli stammered. He wasn't sure what else to say. The following days were a blur of emails, messages, and follow-up interviews. Scholars from all over the world reached out to him, some with praise, others with skepticism. The questions about his work, his method, and his solution to the Kessler conjecture flooded in like an unrelenting tide. Eli felt overwhelmed, unsure how to process all the attention. This was exactly what he had wanted, wasn't it? To be recognized for his work, to prove that he was capable of achieving something monumental. But now that it had happened, the weight of that success felt crushing. Anna noticed the change in him almost immediately. Eli had always been quiet and introspective, but now, he seemed almost distant, like he was pulling away from everything that had once brought him comfort. Their late-night study sessions had turned into awkward silences. The small moments they used to share now felt strained, as if he was no longer sure where he fit in this new world. "You're shutting yourself off again," Anna said one evening as they sat together on the steps outside the dorm. "What's going on, Eli?" Eli didn't respond right away. He stared down at his hands, the faint tremor in his fingers betraying the uncertainty he felt. "I thought this would feel different," he finally said. "I thought I'd feel proud, like I had finally earned my place here. But instead, I feel like I'm drowning in everything that's coming at me." Anna looked at him, her eyes soft but firm. "You can't do this alone, Eli. Not now. You don't have to carry all of this by yourself. You've worked so hard, and you deserve everything that's coming your way. But you also need to give yourself a chance to breathe. Take a step back. You're not a machine. You don't have to be perfect all the time." Eli sighed deeply, letting her words wash over him. Perfect. That was the problem, wasn't it? All his life, he had felt like he had to prove he was perfect, first to his family, then to the world. And now that he had reached the pinnacle of success, he still felt like there was more to be done, more to be achieved, and more to be proved. He had proven the conjecture. But what about everything else? The following week, things only grew more intense. Eli's inbox was filled with invitations to speak at conferences, requests for collaborations, and offers for interviews. He was becoming a name in academic circles, a rising star whose potential seemed limitless. But with each new opportunity, a gnawing sense of unease settled deeper into his chest. Every time someone complimented his work, praised his intellect, or spoke of his genius, Eli felt more out of place. He hadn't set out to be the center of attention. He had just wanted to solve a problem, to prove that he was capable, to prove to himself that the boy from a small town could stand on the same stage as the greats. But now, all the external recognition felt like a burden, a weight that threatened to crush him under its pressure. One morning, as Eli sat in the library working through another round of equations for a new paper he was preparing, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his mother. "Eli, I saw your presentation on TV. I'm so proud of you, son. We always knew you were capable of great things. But remember to stay humble and stay grounded. You're not just a mathematician. You're my boy, and I love you." Eli stared at the message for a long time, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and guilt. His mother's words were a balm, but they also stung. It wasn't just the pressure of being successful that weighed on him, it was the pressure of living up to the expectations of those who had always believed in him. His family had always thought he was destined for greatness, but Eli hadn't thought he would reach this point so quickly, and now that he was here, he didn't feel prepared for it. He remembered something his father had once told him back on the farm, before he left for Harvard. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone but yourself, Eli. Everything else will fall into place." Eli felt the old, familiar ache of homesickness. He hadn't been home in months, and his father's words echoed in his mind now more than ever. Maybe he needed to return to his roots. Maybe he needed to step away from the pressure for a while and remember why he started this journey in the first place. That evening, after a long day of meetings and interviews, Eli found himself walking through the campus alone. The crisp autumn air bit at his skin, but it felt refreshing. He needed this, just a moment of solitude. A moment to think. As he passed by the familiar buildings of Harvard, his thoughts drifted back to his small town. To his family. To the life he had left behind. Maybe it was time to go back. Not forever, but just long enough to find his balance again. Anna was waiting for him when he returned to his dorm room. She had been patient, giving him the space he needed, but it was clear that she had been concerned. "You've been distant lately," she said softly. "I'm here, Eli. But I'm not going to wait forever. If you keep pushing me away, I won't be able to help you." Eli took a deep breath. He knew she was right. He had been shutting everyone out. Not just Anna, but everyone who cared about him. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet. "I'm just overwhelmed. I thought this would feel different, but I'm not sure how to deal with all this pressure. I'm not sure who I am anymore." Anna placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're Eli. You don't have to be anyone else. You don't have to prove yourself to anyone. You've already done something incredible. But don't lose yourself in it. Whatever happens next, just remember who you are." As Eli lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he realized that Anna was right. He didn't have to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had proven what he was capable of, but the journey was far from over. It was okay to feel lost sometimes. It was okay to take a step back, breathe, and remember who he was before all of this. The genius, the mathematician, the boy from the farm, it was all part of him. And he didn't have to be anything more. The decision had been made. Eli needed a break, a moment of clarity away from the whirlwind that had consumed him since the symposium. The emails, the invitations, the expectations, it was all too much. He wasn't sure when it had stopped being about the work and started being about everything else. But one thing was certain, he had to step away, even if just for a short time. The moment Eli arrived at the bus station, his mind was already at ease. The bright lights of Harvard and the buzz of academic life were far behind him now, and all that lay ahead was the quiet, familiar peace of his small hometown. As the bus rumbled down the highway, Eli watched the cityscape give way to open fields, the gentle slopes of the hills and the scattered farmhouses that dotted the countryside. It was a world that felt like it had stood still for years, untouched by the pressures and expectations of the outside world. The familiar sight of the red barn came into view as the bus turned onto the road leading into town. Eli's heart gave a little skip. He hadn't been home since he left for Harvard, and the rush of nostalgia hit him harder than he expected. The scent of freshly cut hay, the quiet hum of rural life, it was all here, waiting for him. When the bus came to a stop in front of the small town's only station, Eli stepped off onto the pavement, stretching his legs and breathing in the cool autumn air. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the fields. The familiar sounds of crickets and rustling leaves filled the air. This was the place that had shaped him, the place where he had first discovered his love for numbers, for puzzles, for the world beyond what he had been told was possible. His mother's old blue pickup truck was parked in front of the station, waiting for him. His mother, Kathy, stood next to it, waving as Eli approached. Her face was framed by the same soft features he remembered from childhood, her brown hair now speckled with a few strands of gray, her warm smile unchanged. "Eli," she called out, her voice full of warmth. "You look so grown up. It's been too long, son." Eli felt a lump rise in his throat. It had been far too long. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He hugged her tightly, letting the embrace linger for a moment longer than usual. He realized, with a pang, how much he had missed this, her presence, her comfort, the simple feeling of being home. They piled into the truck, and as the wheels spun down the dirt road toward the farmhouse, Eli felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The tension that had built up in his shoulders over the past few months began to melt away. The constant pressure, the questions, the expectations, they seemed so far removed now. All that mattered was the familiar landscape of rolling hills and fields of corn, the same landscape that had shaped him, that had been with him through all the highs and lows of his life. Dinner that evening was simple but satisfying, a warm bowl of homemade vegetable soup and freshly baked cornbread. They ate together at the kitchen table, just the two of them, with the soft glow of the kitchen light casting long shadows on the walls. Kathy talked about the local news, how the crops were coming in, how the weather had been unusually mild this year, how her best friend from high school had dropped by for a visit. Eli listened, grateful for the normalcy of it all. But as they ate, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. His mother was still the same kind-hearted, hard-working woman who had always supported him, but he was no longer the same Eli who had left this place. The boy who had dreamed of escaping the farm, of proving himself in a world far beyond the reaches of this small town, had grown into someone different. Someone who had done what he set out to do. Someone who had changed. As his mother cleared the table, Eli asked softly, "Mom, do you ever miss it? The farm life?" Kathy paused for a moment, as if considering the question carefully. She turned back to him, wiping her hands on the towel. "I miss the simplicity of it sometimes," she said, her voice distant. "Life was hard, but it was honest. We worked hard, and we had what we needed. But I never wanted that for you, Eli. I always wanted more for you. I wanted you to have the chance to do something big, something important." Eli nodded, the weight of her words settling on him. He had always known how much his mother had sacrificed for him to have a better life. She had given up her own dreams so that he could chase his. But now, standing here in the quiet of their kitchen, Eli wasn't sure what big or important meant anymore. He had reached the top, and yet, he felt strangely empty. That night, after they finished the dishes and Kathy had retired to her room, Eli sat outside on the porch, looking out over the dark fields. The stars were brilliant in the clear sky, and the familiar chirp of crickets filled the air. He had been here before, on nights like this, laying on the old wooden steps, staring up at the stars, wondering what his future might hold. Back then, his world had felt so small. But now, it felt both vast and overwhelming. The pressure of expectations, the weight of his own achievements, it was all there, pressing down on him even here, in the place where he had once felt free. As the night grew colder, Eli wrapped his jacket tighter around his shoulders, lost in thought. Maybe that was it, maybe he was looking for something more than just success. Maybe what he needed was a sense of purpose that went beyond proving himself, beyond being the best. Maybe what he needed was to remember who he was before all this, the boy who had fallen in love with math because it was something pure, something that made sense in a world that so often didn't. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about being something, it was about being someone. Eli knew that he couldn't stay here forever. He had a life, a career, a future waiting for him at Harvard. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of clarity, a sense that whatever came next, he could handle it. He had nothing to prove to anyone but himself. Tomorrow, he whispered to himself, I'll go for a walk down by the creek. Just like when I was a kid. The next morning, after a simple breakfast, Eli headed out to the creek. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the horizon. The path leading down to the water was the same as it had always been, narrow, winding, lined with tall grass that brushed against his legs. As Eli stood by the creek, the familiar sounds of running water filled his ears, and the gentle breeze tousled his hair. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the peace of the moment wash over him. For the first time in a long while, Eli felt at home. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Eli woke up the next morning to the soft light of dawn creeping through the curtains. The farmhouse was quiet, save for the distant hum of a tractor starting up and the low croak of frogs from the creek. It felt as if the entire world was still, untouched, and waiting. He sat up in bed and glanced around the familiar room, feeling a deep sense of comfort. It was strange, how different everything felt now. In the past, this room had been a reminder of what he had wanted to escape. He had always longed for more knowledge, more challenges, more of the world outside. But now, standing at the precipice of a new chapter, he realized that the life he had once tried to escape was the one that had shaped him most. It wasn't just the achievements he had made, or the fame he had gained. It was the quiet moments like this, the moments of solitude, where he could just be. The next few days passed in a blur of simple tasks and quiet reflection. Eli spent mornings walking the fields, afternoons by the creek, and evenings reading books he hadn't had time to enjoy in years. His mother didn't ask too many questions, she let him be, understanding that he needed time to process everything that had happened. But it wasn't just the physical break that Eli needed. It was the mental break, the space to think, to breathe, without the constant pressure of deadlines, papers, and academic expectations. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't just a student at Harvard. He was just Eli, the boy who grew up here, surrounded by the endless fields and the people who had always supported him. One afternoon, as Eli walked down the gravel road toward the old red barn, he spotted his old friend Luke driving a tractor, plowing the field. Luke had been his best friend growing up, the one who had always been by his side through all the years of hard work and simpler joys. They had spent countless hours together, fixing fences, playing pickup basketball games, and dreaming about life beyond the farm. Eli waved, and Luke waved back with a grin that stretched across his face. As soon as Luke turned off the engine, he climbed down from the tractor and jogged over to Eli. The years seemed to melt away between them, and in that moment, Eli was reminded of the bond they had shared. "Eli. I didn't think I'd see you back here anytime soon," Luke said with a laugh, slapping him on the back. "How's Harvard treating you? Still solving the world's biggest math problems?" Eli smiled, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's been a lot, actually. Too much, maybe." Luke raised an eyebrow. "Too much? You, of all people. You're the one who used to be obsessed with getting out of here and making a name for yourself. You've been waiting for this, haven't you?" "I thought I was," Eli admitted, his voice quieter now. "But I think I forgot something along the way. I got so caught up in everything that I forgot why I started in the first place." Luke studied him for a moment, his expression softening. "You mean math?" Eli nodded. "Yeah. I used to love it, you know. It wasn't about impressing anyone or proving something to the world. It was just about solving problems. About finding beauty in the patterns, the simplicity of it all. But now it feels different. Like there's this constant pressure to do more, to be more. And I'm not sure I know who I am anymore in all of it." Luke leaned back against the tractor, folding his arms across his chest. "I get it, man. I really do. But you've got to remember, there's a balance. You can be the genius, but you can't forget who you are. You're not just a mathematician, Eli. You're a person with a history, a family, a life that's bigger than any problem you solve." Eli let the words sink in, realizing how true they were. He had spent so much time focusing on his work that he had let everything else fade into the background. But Luke was right. He wasn't just the kid from the farm who solved impossible problems. He was someone with a past, with relationships that meant more than any academic achievement ever could. "Thanks, Luke," Eli said quietly. "I needed to hear that." Luke grinned and slapped him on the back again. "Anytime. Just don't forget about us little people while you're off solving the universe's problems, all right?" Eli chuckled, feeling lighter than he had in days. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was reconnecting with himself, with the person he had been before Harvard and before the pressure of expectations took over. That evening, after dinner, Eli found himself alone on the porch again, staring out over the fields as the sun set. His mind was clearer now. He had spent so much time chasing after approval, after success, that he had forgotten why he had started his journey in the first place, because math was his passion. It was something that made sense, something that he could lose himself in, something that was purely his own. But what if success wasn't the ultimate goal? What if happiness, balance, and fulfillment were just as important? Eli had always been taught to reach for greatness, to achieve at all costs, but now, he wasn't so sure. He needed to find a way to pursue his passion without letting it consume him. He needed to reconnect with the things that brought him joy outside of academia, the farm, his family, his friends, the quiet moments that made life worth living. Eli stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, gazing down the long road that stretched out before him. He knew he couldn't stay here forever. His future was still waiting for him at Harvard. But when he returned, it would be different. He would approach his work with a new perspective. It wasn't just about proving his worth to anyone else, it was about doing something that mattered to him. His journey was far from over. But for the first time, Eli felt ready to face whatever came next, knowing that he could do it on his own terms. The next morning, after a final breakfast with his mother, Eli packed his bags and headed for the bus station once more. His mother hugged him tightly before he left, her warmth and love a steady anchor as he prepared to step back into the whirlwind of his academic life. "Come back soon," Kathy said, her voice thick with emotion. "And don't forget who you are, Eli. You don't have to carry the world on your shoulders. Just carry your heart." Eli nodded, his throat tight. "I won't forget, Mom. I promise." As the bus pulled away, Eli looked out the window one last time at the fields, the creek, and the place that had always been his home. It was time to go back, but this time, he knew he wasn't just going back to solve equations. He was going back to be himself. The bus pulled into the station early in the morning, the familiar buildings of Harvard looming ahead. Eli felt a strange sense of calm wash over him as he stepped off the bus and into the bustling streets of Cambridge. It had been a few weeks since he left for his brief retreat, and though the city still held the same energy, everything about it felt different now. The pressure, the deadlines, the frantic pace of it all seemed less overwhelming somehow. For the first time in a long while, Eli was not only returning to Harvard but to himself. He wasn't just the ambitious student determined to prove himself. He was someone who had learned to pause, to breathe, and to reconnect with the parts of himself he had long neglected. He had learned that success was not a destination, it was a journey, and one that needed balance. As he walked across the campus, Eli noticed the familiar faces of his professors, fellow students, and friends, each person absorbed in their own world. But this time, Eli didn't feel the weight of their expectations. He had been away long enough to realize that they were just as focused on their own paths as he was on his. Their judgment didn't matter, not anymore. What mattered was how Eli felt about his work, how it resonated with him on a deeper level. Eli's first stop after arriving back at his dorm was the mathematics department. The head of the department, Professor John Mason, had been one of the few people who had always believed in Eli's potential. They had spent countless hours discussing complex theories and equations, and now, Eli needed to share the shift in his perspective. He needed to tell him how his time at home had transformed him, not just as a student, but as a person. Professor Mason greeted him with a warm smile when Eli stepped into his office. "Eli. It's good to see you back. How was your break? I assume you're ready to get back to work, right?" Eli smiled back, but his eyes were different now, calm, thoughtful. "Actually, Professor, I've been thinking a lot about work, about everything. I've learned something important during my time away. I don't want to rush into any of my research with the same tunnel vision I had before. I want to take a step back, look at things with a fresh perspective, and maybe focus on projects that truly excite me, not just those that will impress." Professor Mason's brow furrowed for a moment, but then he leaned back in his chair, intrigued. "That's quite a shift, Eli. I'm glad to hear you found a way to balance the pressure with your passion. So, what's your plan?" "I'm still figuring that out," Eli admitted. "But I know I want to work on something that feels meaningful to me. Not just because it's the next logical step in my career, but because it's something I can connect with, something that speaks to who I am." Mason nodded thoughtfully. "You're starting to understand what many of us never get around to. The work we do as mathematicians is not just for publication or recognition. It's for the love of it. If you can approach your research with that mindset, you'll accomplish more than you ever thought possible. Trust me on that." Eli felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had feared that his professors would see his newfound perspective as a sign of weakness, as if he were backing out of the high stakes he had once embraced. But instead, Mason seemed to understand. "I think I know exactly what you need, Eli," Mason continued. "There's a problem we've been struggling with in the department for a while. It's a bit tricky and quite abstract, but if you're up for it, I think it might be the right challenge for you. It's more than just theory, it's about finding connections in unexpected places." Eli felt a spark of curiosity flare within him. This was exactly what he needed, something that would make him think deeply, something that would push his boundaries without the usual pressure. "Tell me more," Eli said. Mason leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with enthusiasm. "It's a problem related to prime number distributions. It's tied to a series of conjectures that haven't been fully proven, even though they've been the subject of debate for years. If you're interested, I can give you the full details. But know this, it's not a problem that's going to be solved overnight." Eli's mind immediately began to race. This wasn't just any problem, it was a challenge that would require creativity, innovation, and, most importantly, time, something he had plenty of now. For the first time in a long while, he felt that familiar thrill of excitement, the feeling that came with diving into the unknown and not knowing what he would discover. "I'm in," Eli said, his voice firm with resolve. The next few weeks passed in a blur of equations, notebooks, and quiet moments of reflection. Eli worked tirelessly on the new problem, often staying up late into the night, lost in his calculations. But there was something different about this work, it didn't feel like an obligation. It felt like a discovery. Every breakthrough, every new connection he made, was like uncovering a hidden treasure. The pressure to succeed no longer weighed him down because he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to understand, to find something that spoke to him on a deeper level. His friends began to notice the change. They saw the shift in his energy, the way he seemed more present, more grounded. He wasn't consumed by the drive to be the best anymore, he was simply doing the work he loved, for the love of it. One evening, as Eli sat in the department lounge, going over his notes, his friend Sarah, who had been with him through the ups and downs of his academic journey, stopped by to check in. "So, how's the new project going?" she asked, settling into the chair next to him. Eli smiled, his eyes lighting up. "It's going great, actually. It's challenging, but it feels right. I'm finally working on something that excites me, something I'm passionate about. It's not about impressing anyone or proving anything, it's just about solving the puzzle." Sarah nodded, understanding immediately. "You've changed, Eli. In a good way. I can see it. I'm glad you're finally doing something that makes you happy." Eli paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. He realized that she was right. He had been so focused on his career that he had forgotten why he started this journey in the first place. But now, he was doing it for himself, not for anyone else. As the weeks turned into months, Eli's work on the prime number conjecture grew more refined. He made significant progress, slowly chipping away at the problem, finding patterns where others had failed. It wasn't a quick process, but the sense of satisfaction he felt with each new insight was more than he could have ever imagined. One afternoon, as he sat in the library, reviewing his work, he had a sudden realization. It wasn't the solution to the problem that mattered most. It was the process, the way he had grown, the way he had learned to embrace the journey. The work itself had transformed him, not just intellectually, but personally. Eli had learned that success wasn't about being the best or gaining recognition. It was about finding meaning in what you do and pursuing it with everything you have. It was about balance, between work and life, ambition and contentment. And for the first time in a long while, Eli knew exactly who he was and what he wanted. Eli sat in his dorm room, the evening light streaming through the window, casting long shadows across his desk. His room was cluttered with papers, notebooks, and a half-drunk cup of coffee, but his mind was far from the chaos of the physical space around him. He was focused, as he often was, on the puzzle at hand, the one that had become his world. But tonight, something felt different. The usual rush of excitement that came with discovering a new insight, solving a problem, or uncovering a new pattern wasn't there. Instead, he felt a quiet unease. It had been several months since he had returned to Harvard, and Eli had made incredible strides in his research. He was on the verge of a breakthrough in the prime number conjecture, something that could make waves in the mathematical community. But for some reason, the sense of accomplishment that usually followed such progress was missing. Something inside him was stirring, a nagging feeling that there was more to life than equations and conjectures. He rubbed his eyes, frustrated. It wasn't that he didn't love math anymore, it was more complicated than that. He still felt the thrill of working on a problem, still felt that rush when a new idea came to him. But now, it didn't feel as important as it once had. The world of mathematics had always been a refuge for him, a place where he could escape the chaos of life. But in the quiet of his room, he realized that he no longer wanted to escape. He wanted to face the world head-on, to experience life in a way that wasn't tied to the narrow confines of his academic bubble. Eli stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the campus below. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. There was a part of him that had always dreamed of working at a prestigious research institute, of pushing the boundaries of human knowledge and being recognized for his achievements. He had spent years striving toward that dream, sacrificing so much of himself in the process. But now, standing on the edge of this new realization, he wondered if it was really what he wanted anymore. Maybe I've been chasing the wrong thing, Eli murmured to himself. The next day, Eli met up with Sarah for coffee at a small cafe near the river. She had always been his sounding board, the one person he could talk to without fear of judgment. As they sat at a table overlooking the water, Eli found himself confiding in her about the confusion that had been plaguing him. "Sarah, I don't know what's going on," Eli began, his voice hesitant. "I've made so much progress in my research, but I don't feel the same sense of excitement I used to. I'm so close to solving this problem, but it feels hollow. Like it's not enough anymore. Like I'm just going through the motions." Sarah took a slow sip of her coffee, considering his words carefully. "Eli, you've been working non-stop for years. You've sacrificed a lot for your research. Maybe you've just been so focused on this one goal that you've lost sight of the bigger picture. What do you really want out of all of this?" Eli stared down at his coffee cup, his mind racing. What did he really want? The question seemed so simple, but the answer was elusive. He had spent so many years defining himself by his academic success that he hadn't stopped to consider what he wanted beyond that. For the first time in a long time, he realized how little he actually knew about himself outside of his work. "I want to feel alive," Eli said, his voice soft. "I want to do something that makes me feel like I'm not just existing in this small bubble, but truly living. But I don't know how to balance that with everything I've worked for." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes warm with understanding. "I think that's something you're going to have to figure out on your own, Eli. But I don't think you should be afraid to explore other paths. It's okay to take a step back and look at life from a different perspective. You don't have to choose between your passion and the rest of your life. You can have both, but you might have to redefine what both looks like." Eli nodded slowly, her words sinking in. "Maybe I've been too focused on the idea of success, of what other people think success looks like. Maybe I need to stop chasing approval and start chasing something that makes me feel whole." "I think that's the first step," Sarah said, her smile gentle. "You've always been driven by this deep passion for math, but maybe it's time to think about how that passion fits into the larger picture of your life. You're not just a mathematician, you're a person with dreams, relationships, and a future that's not defined by the things you've already accomplished." Eli sat back in his chair, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't about abandoning his passion for mathematics, it was about finding a way to integrate it into a fuller life. He had spent so much time trying to achieve academic greatness that he had forgotten the importance of enjoying the journey, not just the destination. The following weeks were a time of reflection for Eli. He continued working on his research, but he approached it with a new mindset. He didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone anymore. He wasn't trying to solve the problem just for the sake of recognition, he was solving it because it was something that truly intrigued him, something that he wanted to understand on a deeper level. But Eli also began exploring other interests, things he had never allowed himself to pursue while buried in textbooks and equations. He started taking long walks through the city, visiting museums, and even writing in a journal, a practice he had never thought he would enjoy. These small acts of exploration helped him reconnect with the world around him, grounding him in ways that academia never had. One evening, as he sat in a quiet park near the river, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Eli realized that he had come to a crossroads. He didn't have to choose between his passion for mathematics and a fulfilling life, he could have both, but he needed to redefine what balance meant for him. For the first time in a long time, Eli felt like he was ready to move forward, not just as a mathematician, but as someone who understood the importance of living a full, balanced life. The crisp autumn air filled Eli's lungs as he walked across the Harvard campus. The leaves were changing, their fiery reds and golds reflecting the inner transformation Eli had been going through these past few months. It was hard to believe how much had shifted in his life in such a short time. The questions that once consumed him, the relentless drive to outdo himself and others, had softened. He no longer felt the same urgency, the same pressure to succeed at all costs. But now, he was standing at another crossroad. A decision loomed before him, one that could change the course of his life once again. He had received an offer from a prestigious research institute in New York, a place where some of the brightest minds in mathematics worked tirelessly on problems that could redefine the field. It was a dream opportunity, the kind most students would sell everything for. The offer was generous, with funding for years of research, a guaranteed position as a lead researcher, and an academic circle that would provide him with the support and resources he needed to accomplish his most ambitious goals. On the surface, it seemed like the perfect next step. It was everything Eli had been working toward, a place where his intellect could flourish, a stage where he could prove himself in front of the world. But something about it didn't sit right with him anymore. He had been offered a similar position in London as well, another prestigious opportunity that promised international recognition and groundbreaking work. But Eli had turned that down without a second thought. The decision felt easy. But New York was different. The institute was exactly what he had envisioned years ago, a center of excellence where his contributions would be valued, his name would be remembered, and he could leave his mark on the academic world. The problem was, after everything he had learned about himself during his time away, he wasn't sure if that was the future he truly wanted. Eli sat at his desk in his dorm room, the offer letters spread out in front of him. They were formal, impressive documents, shiny and professional, just like everything about the opportunity they represented. But the more he stared at them, the more he realized that something had changed in him. He wasn't the same person who had dreamed of fame and prestige in academia. He was a person who had learned the importance of living a balanced life, someone who had come to understand that success wasn't just about titles and recognition. It was about fulfillment, connection, and inner peace. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from Sarah. "Hey Eli, are you free for dinner tonight? I think you need a break from all that paper staring. Let's talk." Eli smiled, grateful for her friendship. Sarah had been a constant through all of his academic struggles and triumphs, but lately, she had become something more, someone who could help him navigate the personal side of his journey. He needed her perspective more than ever. Dinner that evening was at a small Italian bistro near campus. It was the kind of place that had been a favorite of Eli's during his early days at Harvard, when he was first learning to balance his work with the simple pleasures of life. Now, as he sat across from Sarah, he realized how much more he appreciated moments like this. Conversations over pasta, the warmth of a familiar place, the shared laughter, they were things he hadn't fully savored until recently. "So, I got the offer," Eli said, sliding the letter across the table toward Sarah. She picked it up and scanned it quickly, raising an eyebrow. "This is impressive. It's a dream offer, Eli." The kind of thing that most mathematicians would kill for. I know, Eli replied. That's the problem. It's everything I've been working for, everything I thought I wanted. But now that it's here, I'm not sure it's the right fit anymore. It's like I've spent so long chasing success that I forgot to ask myself what I really wanted. Sarah set the letter down and leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. I get that. It's like you've been so focused on the next milestone that you haven't stopped to look around and see if that milestone is actually what you want. I think it's a big step for you, Eli, that you're questioning this. You've never done that before. I know, Eli said quietly, swirling his glass of water. I used to think success was all about proving myself, about being seen and recognized. But now, I just want something more. I want a life that feels balanced, where I'm not just defined by my work, where I'm not constantly chasing something that may never be enough. Sarah nodded. So, what are you going to do? The offer's still there, right? Eli's heart beat a little faster. Yeah. I've been sitting with it for days, but I just can't shake this feeling. I could go to New York, be a part of that incredible institute, work with some of the best minds in the world. But what if it's not enough? What if I'm just setting myself up for a lifetime of being stuck in the same cycle? What if there's something more I should be doing with my life, something that doesn't involve a title or a position? The words hung in the air for a moment, the weight of Eli's uncertainty settling between them. Have you thought about teaching? Sarah asked after a long pause. I mean, not at a university where you're buried under research all the time, but something more personal. What about mentoring students, teaching them the way you've learned, helping them see the beauty in math the way you do? Eli blinked, the idea catching him off guard. He had never really considered teaching in that way. Sure, he had thought about being a professor one day, but it had always been as a means to an end, something that could supplement his research. But what if teaching was more than just a way to make a living? What if it could be a way to give back, to inspire the next generation of mathematicians, to guide them toward their own paths without the pressure of constantly proving himself? I haven't thought about that. But it's an interesting idea. Maybe I could find a way to combine teaching and research. I wouldn't have to choose one or the other, and I'd get to shape the future of math in a way that isn't just about personal success. Sarah smiled warmly. Exactly. You've got the skills, Eli. And you're at a place in your life where you can choose what truly aligns with who you are, not what society expects from you. Eli looked at his offer letter again, his fingers tracing the edges of the paper. He knew that the decision wasn't easy, but for the first time, he felt ready to make it. He had spent so much time looking at the future as a series of achievements to be unlocked, but now he saw it differently. The future wasn't a checklist. It was a journey, and it was his to define. Later that night, as Eli lay in bed staring up at the ceiling, he knew what he had to do. He wasn't going to rush into the offer from New York. He was going to take his time and carve out a path that felt true to him. His next step wasn't about fitting into a mold, it was about creating something entirely his own. Eli's fingers hovered over the keyboard, the email window open on his laptop. It was time to send the response to the Research Institute's offer, an email that would determine the next chapter of his life. His heart raced, not from excitement, but from the weight of the decision. For the first time in a long time, the choice in front of him wasn't about pursuing an ambitious goal for the sake of recognition or prestige. This time, it was about defining his own path, one that would bring him fulfillment, peace, and perhaps most importantly, purpose. It was a decision that could reshape his entire future, and yet, Eli knew it was the right one. He had thought long and hard about his options, weighing the pros and cons of joining the prestigious institute in New York, a place where his brilliance would shine, and he would be among the brightest minds in the world. The possibilities were endless, new problems to solve, endless research funding, and the potential for global recognition. The academic world had always been a place where Eli felt most comfortable. But that was before he'd begun questioning what success really meant. As Sarah had pointed out, there was more to life than just academic acclaim, and Eli had come to understand that in the months since he'd started reflecting on his path. A part of him still longed for the intellectual stimulation that a top-tier research institute would provide, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that his true calling wasn't just about solving problems, it was about making a difference in the lives of others. He had always been good at math. It came naturally to him, like breathing. But lately, he had been asking himself a different question: what was the point of it all? Was it enough just to solve equations? Or was there more value in teaching others, in sharing the knowledge he had acquired, and guiding the next generation of mathematicians? After much soul-searching, Eli had realized that while his heart still burned for solving the toughest problems in math, his greater desire was to teach, mentor, and pass on the gift of learning to others. He didn't want to spend his life alone in a lab, chasing after accolades. He wanted to help students realize their own potential, to guide them as they discovered the beauty in math, the way it could shape the world and open their minds to infinite possibilities. Eli had already decided. He wasn't going to take the offer from New York. He was going to decline it and pursue a different path, one that would allow him to balance his love for research with his newfound passion for teaching. But the email. The email had to be perfect. It had to be respectful, professional, and firm. Eli knew that turning down such an incredible offer wouldn't be easy for the institute to accept. After all, the position he was offered was highly competitive, and there were other top-tier candidates who would be thrilled to step into his place. But Eli had no doubt in his mind that he had made the right decision. He wasn't running away from success, he was stepping into something better. Something more meaningful. He typed slowly, carefully, drafting the email. He could feel the weight of each word as he wrote. Subject: response to offer for research position. Dear Dr. Harlan. I hope this message finds you well. I am writing to formally thank you for the generous offer to join the team at the Institute for Advanced Mathematical Research in New York. It is truly an honor to have been considered for such a prestigious position, and I greatly appreciate the time and effort that has gone into the selection process. After careful consideration, I have decided to decline the offer. This was not an easy decision, as the opportunity to work alongside some of the brightest minds in mathematics is something I have always aspired to. However, after much reflection, I have realized that my professional path is taking a different direction. I am eager to explore opportunities where I can balance my passion for research with a commitment to teaching and mentoring the next generation of mathematicians. I am deeply grateful for the opportunity you've extended to me, and I wish you and the Institute continued success in your important work. I hope our paths may cross again in the future, and I would be honored to stay in touch. Thank you once again for your understanding and for considering me for this position. Sincerely, Eli Thompson. Eli stared at the email for a moment, his heart pounding. He had written it with sincerity, knowing that it was the right decision, but still, there was a part of him that feared the unknown. He clicked send without looking back. The email left his inbox, and with it, Eli felt the weight of his decision settle into place. It wasn't the easiest choice, but it was the right one. Now, he had to face what came next. The next few days passed in a blur. Eli had expected to feel a sense of relief, but instead, there was an odd mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. He had taken a leap of faith, stepping away from a golden opportunity. But what now? What would the future look like? Would his decision be validated, or would he regret it? Sarah, as always, was there to provide support. When Eli shared the news with her, she could sense the mix of emotions in his voice. You did it, Eli, she said, her smile reaching her eyes. You made the choice that feels right for you. That's huge. I hope it was the right choice, Eli said, his voice low. I've never turned down something like this before. It's scary. I know, she said, her voice gentle. But you've always followed your heart. And I think that's what matters most. You're not turning your back on math. You're just choosing a different way to share it with the world. "You're going to make an incredible teacher, Eli. You'll see." Over the next few weeks, Eli began to search for opportunities that would allow him to teach and continue his research. He applied to several universities, looking for positions that would offer a balance between teaching and academic exploration. While the idea of teaching full-time was new to him, the more he thought about it, the more excited he became. He realized that his passion for math didn't have to be confined to research, it could be spread across generations of students, inspiring them to pursue their own dreams in the field. One afternoon, Eli received a phone call that would change everything. "Eli," said the voice on the other end of the line, "this is Dr. Wilkins from the University of California, Berkeley. We've reviewed your application, and we'd love to offer you a position as an assistant professor in the Department of Mathematics." Eli's heart skipped a beat. Berkeley was one of the most prestigious schools in the world. The position would allow him to conduct research and teach in a dynamic environment, everything he had hoped for and more. He was about to enter a new chapter, one that would allow him to blend his love for math with his passion for teaching. He felt a rush of excitement, followed by a deep sense of satisfaction. "I'd be honored," Eli said, his voice steady despite the thrill he felt. "Thank you so much." In the weeks that followed, Eli settled into his new role at Berkeley. It wasn't easy, there were long hours of teaching, preparing lectures, and adjusting to the academic environment. But there was a deep sense of fulfillment in it, something he had never experienced before. As he stood in front of his first class, explaining the beauty of prime numbers to a group of eager students, Eli realized that he had made the right choice. He wasn't just solving mathematical problems for his own glory anymore. He was giving something back, shaping young minds and inspiring them to see the world in a new way. And in that moment, Eli understood what true success was. It wasn't about recognition or prestige. It was about finding purpose, connecting with others, and using his gifts to make a difference in the world. The soft hum of the lecture hall was a comforting sound to Eli as he set up his notes for the morning's class. The sun was just beginning to rise over the rolling hills of Berkeley, and the soft golden light filtered through the large windows of the classroom. It was the start of his second semester at the University of California, Berkeley, and every day felt like a fresh beginning. Eli had settled into his new role as an assistant professor faster than he had expected. His lectures on mathematical theory had quickly gained the attention of his students, many of whom were impressed not just by his knowledge, but by his ability to make complex concepts approachable. He had always had a gift for simplifying the complicated, a skill that was proving invaluable in the classroom. But it wasn't just the teaching that excited him, it was the conversations, the questions, the spark of curiosity in his students' eyes when they grasped something for the first time. The world of academia had always been competitive, and Eli knew that this role wasn't without its challenges. There were research deadlines, departmental expectations, and an ever-growing stack of papers to grade. But he had a newfound sense of balance in his life. His schedule allowed him to continue his own research, but it also gave him the space to connect with his students, to mentor them, and to share his passion for mathematics in a way he never had before. Eli walked into the classroom and set his bag on the desk. The students were slowly filing in, chatting quietly with each other, some of them catching up on last night's homework. As the bell rang, Eli greeted the class with a warm smile. "Good morning, everyone. Let's get started." He clicked his remote, and the projection screen lit up with the first slide of the day's lesson, Prime Numbers, the Backbone of Modern Cryptography. The topic was a favorite of his, a perfect blend of theory and real-world application. But today, Eli wasn't just teaching them the technicalities of prime numbers, he was teaching them about their significance, the profound role they played in securing information and shaping the digital world. As he began his lecture, Eli was reminded of the early days of his academic career, the late-night study sessions, the sleepless hours spent solving complex problems, and the quiet satisfaction that came from cracking a particularly difficult puzzle. But now, standing before a classroom full of eager students, Eli felt something he hadn't in a long time: purpose. He wasn't just learning for himself anymore. He was teaching others to find their own passion, to see the beauty in the subject the way he did. As the lecture continued, Eli noticed Sarah sitting in the back of the room, her face lit up by the glow of the projector screen. She had come to visit him, as she often did, to see how his new life at Berkeley was shaping up. Eli felt a sense of pride knowing that Sarah, who had supported him through the toughest times, was here to witness this next chapter of his journey. After class, Eli and Sarah went for a walk around the campus, the afternoon sunlight casting long shadows on the paths. They passed the university's iconic Sather Tower, and Sarah commented, "You look different, Eli. Happier, even." Eli smiled, his heart light. "I am, actually. I didn't know how much I needed this, how much I needed to teach. It feels right. I get to share my love for math, but I also get to help people find their own paths. It's not just about solving problems anymore. It's about inspiring others to solve them." Sarah looked thoughtful. "I think you found your place. And you've made a real impact on these students. I can tell. There's something special about the way you teach." Eli glanced over at her, his eyes softening. "You always know what to say. It's like you see right through me." Sarah chuckled. "That's what friends are for." They continued their walk in silence for a few moments, each of them caught up in their own thoughts. But Eli couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. He had come so far, he had been so driven by the idea of success, the fear of not being enough. But now, standing on the other side of it all, he realized that success wasn't just about the accolades, the titles, or the recognition. It was about finding a place where you could make a difference, where you could be true to yourself, and where your work could contribute to the world in a meaningful way. That evening, after their walk, Eli sat in his office, reviewing his upcoming lecture notes. His phone buzzed, and he picked it up to find a text from one of his students, Jonah, asking for help with a problem they had encountered in the previous class. Jonah was a promising student, one of the brightest in the class. He had a natural talent for mathematics, but he often struggled with self-doubt, a trait that Eli had noticed early on. Jonah reminded him of himself, the way he used to second-guess his abilities, the fear of falling short. Eli understood that feeling better than anyone. He typed back quickly, offering to meet the next day to go over the problem together. It was moments like these that reminded him why he had chosen this path. It wasn't just about solving problems on his own, it was about guiding others through their own struggles, helping them see that the solutions were within their reach if they just took the time to trust their instincts. The following week, Eli met with Jonah in the university's math building, a quiet, modern space filled with students working on their own research or collaborating on projects. The sunlight streamed in through the tall windows, casting a warm glow on the room as Eli and Jonah sat across from each other, a set of textbooks open in front of them. "So, what part of the problem are you getting stuck on?" Eli asked, his tone gentle but encouraging. Jonah hesitated, his fingers nervously tapping the edge of his notebook. "I don't know. I feel like I'm missing something. I can't seem to connect all the steps, and I'm afraid I'm not getting it." Eli leaned forward, his eyes soft with understanding. "Jonah, I've been where you are. The truth is, sometimes it takes a little time to get things to click. But the fact that you're struggling means you're learning. You're pushing your boundaries, and that's exactly what you need to do. Remember, math is a process. It's okay if you don't get it right away." Jonah nodded slowly, his eyes brightening. "I guess I just needed to hear that." Eli smiled, pointing to the notebook. "Let's go over it together. I think you're closer than you think." As they worked through the problem, Eli felt a quiet sense of fulfillment settle in his chest. There it was again, purpose. Helping Jonah find his way through the math was exactly why he was here. This was what teaching was all about, helping students realize their potential and watching them grow. Later that night, as Eli walked back to his apartment, he felt a quiet sense of contentment. It had been a long road to get here, but he had arrived. He was no longer chasing after accolades or trying to prove himself to the world. He had found something far more valuable, a purpose that felt real, a life that felt balanced, and a future where he could make a difference, one student at a time. As he looked up at the starry sky above, Eli felt a deep sense of peace. This was only the beginning. Eli sat in his office late one evening, the glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. The soft rustle of papers and the occasional sound of footsteps in the hallway were the only noises in the otherwise quiet building. He'd spent the last few hours preparing for his upcoming lecture, but his mind kept drifting to the stack of research papers that needed his attention. There was always something demanding his time, whether it was teaching, research, or the administrative tasks that came with being a professor. It was in these moments, when the weight of everything seemed to press down on him, that Eli felt the full force of his choices. When he'd first decided to leave the prestigious research institute and pursue a path that blended teaching and research, he had envisioned it as a perfect balance, a life where he could inspire others while still contributing to the academic world. But the reality was more complicated than he had anticipated. Eli had quickly learned that teaching at a university like Berkeley came with its own set of challenges. His schedule was packed, and there were constant demands on his time. There were students to mentor, research projects to complete, papers to grade, and departmental meetings that seemed endless. The balance he had hoped for felt elusive at times, and Eli found himself struggling to keep up. But despite the exhaustion, Eli couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. Every time he stood in front of a classroom, watching his students light up as they understood a difficult concept, he was reminded why he had made this choice. Every email from a student thanking him for his help, every moment of connection with his colleagues, and every breakthrough in his research made the pressure worth it. Still, it wasn't easy. The demands on his time were overwhelming, and Eli often found himself up late into the night, working on lecture slides, grading papers, or revising his research. He had always been a perfectionist, but now, that trait was both his strength and his weakness. He wanted to do everything well, to be the best professor, the most accomplished researcher, and the most supportive mentor. But the truth was, he couldn't do it all perfectly. One morning, after a particularly grueling week, Eli woke up to a message from his department chair, Dr. Thompson. The subject of the email was simple: meeting request. Eli's heart skipped a beat. He had been hearing whispers about departmental changes, and he had a sinking feeling that the meeting wasn't going to be a routine check-in. He had made a name for himself quickly at Berkeley, but with success came expectations. He wasn't sure if he was ready for whatever challenge lay ahead. He read the email again. Eli, I'd like to discuss some upcoming opportunities and challenges within the department. Please come by my office at 2 p.m. today. Eli exhaled slowly, trying to suppress the anxiety rising in his chest. The idea of having another responsibility added to his already full plate was daunting. But, as he had learned time and time again, when the challenges came, he had to face them head-on. At 2 p.m. Eli made his way to Dr. Thompson's office. The walk was short but filled with apprehension. As he knocked on the door and entered, Dr. Thompson greeted him warmly. "Ah, Eli, good to see you. Please, have a seat." Eli sat down, trying to maintain his composure. Dr. Thompson was a well-respected figure in the department, and Eli had always admired her leadership. She was direct, no nonsense, but she also had a way of making you feel heard. "I'm sure you've noticed the changes happening within the department," Dr. Thompson began, her tone serious but not unfriendly. "As you know, we're expanding our research initiatives, and with that comes the need for new leadership. I've been speaking with several colleagues, and we all agree that you're a great candidate to head up the new mathematics research group." Eli blinked, caught off guard. "Head up the group? But I'm still relatively new here. I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of responsibility." Dr. Thompson raised an eyebrow, her gaze thoughtful. "I understand your hesitation, but we believe in your potential. You've shown exceptional promise in both teaching and research, and we think you could lead the group in a direction that would further elevate our department's reputation. You'd have a lot of support, of course, but we need someone who can bring fresh ideas to the table." Eli's mind raced. Leading a research group was no small task, and the responsibility would be immense. He had always preferred working independently, but this was different. It was an opportunity to shape the future of mathematical research at Berkeley, to guide other scholars, collaborate with colleagues, and make an impact on a larger scale. But Eli also knew what that would mean: more meetings, more administrative work, and less time spent on the things that truly fueled his passion: the research, the teaching, the one-on-one connections with students. "Dr. Thompson, I'm honored by your confidence in me," Eli said, his voice steady despite the swirling thoughts in his head. "But I'm not sure I'm the right person for this job. I'm still trying to balance teaching, research, and my personal life. I don't want to overextend myself." Dr. Thompson's expression softened, and she leaned back in her chair. "I understand, Eli. The demands of this position won't be easy. But I think you're someone who thrives under pressure. And let's be honest, you've already proven yourself. What I'm offering is an opportunity for you to have a larger impact, both within the department and beyond it. Think about it. We'll give you time to adjust, and you won't be doing it alone." Eli thought about Sarah. He thought about how, despite everything, he had found a sense of balance in his life. The opportunity to lead the research group was tempting, too tempting to dismiss entirely. But he couldn't deny that the timing was overwhelming. Was this really the right step for him? "Can I have some time to think about it?" Eli asked, his voice quieter now. "I want to be sure I can give this the attention it deserves." "Of course," Dr. Thompson replied, offering a reassuring smile. "Take all the time you need. We want you to feel confident in your decision." Later that evening, Eli sat at his kitchen table, staring at the half-filled mug of coffee in front of him. The silence in his apartment was comforting, but it felt heavy tonight. His mind kept circling back to the conversation with Dr. Thompson. Should he take the position? It was a career-defining opportunity, one that could open doors to new research collaborations and elevate the entire department's standing in the field of mathematics. But the thought of sacrificing the balance he had worked so hard to maintain gnawed at him. He thought of Sarah again, her unwavering support, her ability to see things clearly when he couldn't. Maybe it was time to ask for her advice. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text: "Can we talk? I've got a big decision to make." Within minutes, Sarah responded, "Of course. I'll come over in an hour." An hour later, Sarah arrived at his apartment, and the two of them sat down on the couch, a bowl of popcorn between them, as they often did when they needed to talk. Eli shared the details of the offer, the weight of the decision, and the struggle he felt in balancing his ambitions with his desire for a fulfilling personal life. "I know it's a big opportunity," Sarah said, after a long pause. "But Eli, you've been so focused on balance lately. You've worked so hard to get to a place where you're happy. Do you really want to risk that?" Eli sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know. Part of me wants to say yes, to take the challenge and go for it. But another part of me is terrified that I'll lose everything I've gained, my time, my peace, my connection with the students." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I think you know the answer, Eli. It's not about whether you're capable of handling the responsibility. You are. But it's about what you're willing to sacrifice for it. Maybe you don't need to prove yourself in the way you think you do. You're already making a huge difference." Eli sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. He had been so focused on external validation, on proving that he was worthy of the opportunities that came his way, that he had forgotten the importance of staying true to himself. Finally, he looked up at Sarah, a sense of clarity washing over him. "I think you're right. It's not about proving myself anymore. It's about finding a way to be happy and fulfilled without sacrificing everything else." He smiled, a weight lifting off his shoulders. "I'm going to turn it down." Eli knew that making this decision was the right one. It wasn't the easiest path, but it was the one that allowed him to stay true to his values, values that had brought him peace and fulfillment in his new life. His work was important, but his happiness and balance were even more so. As he sat in his quiet apartment that night, Eli realized that, in a world full of challenges and triumphs, the greatest victory was in choosing the life that felt right for him. The days following Eli's decision to decline the leadership role in the mathematics research group felt different. There was a new calmness to his routine, a sense of peace that had eluded him for weeks. He could already feel the weight lifting off his shoulders. Instead of being consumed by deadlines, meetings, and the pressure of managing a department initiative, he was able to focus on what had truly driven him to academia in the first place, his passion for teaching, his connection with his students, and the research that excited him on a personal level. One morning, as he prepared for his next lecture on topology and geometry, Eli was interrupted by a soft knock at his office door. He looked up to see Sarah, her bright smile immediately putting him at ease. "Hey," she said, stepping into the room with a cup of coffee in hand. "How's the decision feeling now?" Eli grinned, his expression more relaxed than it had been in weeks. "Better than I expected. I can already feel the difference. I'm teaching more, I'm writing more, and I actually have time to breathe. I think I made the right call." Sarah sat down across from him, placing the coffee on his desk. "I knew you'd come to the right conclusion. You're a natural teacher, Eli. That's where your heart is. It's not about titles or recognition, it's about making a difference in people's lives." Eli nodded, sipping the coffee Sarah had brought him. "I've always known that. But I think it took me a while to understand that I don't need to constantly prove myself. I'm doing what I love, and that's enough." But just as Eli began to relax, the universe threw him another curveball. The following week, Eli received an unexpected phone call. It was from Dr. Thompson, the department chair. The tone of her voice was urgent but calm, and Eli could tell she had something important to share. "Eli, I hope you're doing well," she began, her voice steady. "I'm reaching out because we've just received some exciting news, and I wanted you to be among the first to know." Eli's pulse quickened slightly. He had no idea what this could be about. "What's going on?" "Well," Dr. Thompson continued, "the university has been selected for a major grant initiative focused on advancing research in applied mathematics. It's a prestigious opportunity that will bring together top researchers from around the world. They're asking for someone to head the project, someone who can combine theoretical and applied knowledge in a way that's innovative and forward-thinking." Eli's heart skipped a beat. "Are you suggesting I take the lead?" Dr. Thompson paused, and Eli could hear the smile in her voice as she replied. "Yes. After your recent decision to focus on teaching and research, I think you'd be an excellent fit. This is the type of opportunity that could help take the department, and your own career, to the next level." Eli was silent for a moment, processing her words. The idea of being involved in such a groundbreaking project was tempting. But the question that immediately flooded his mind was this what he wanted, or was it just another shiny opportunity that could pull him away from the life he was trying to build? "I appreciate you thinking of me," Eli said carefully, his voice measured. "But I need to make sure I'm not overcommitting myself. I've already turned down one leadership position recently, and I don't want to fall into the trap of stretching myself too thin again." Dr. Thompson's tone softened. "I understand, Eli. But this could be different. We're talking about a collaborative effort, something that involves multiple researchers working together. It's not just about running a department, it's about being part of something bigger, something that could shape the future of the field. I think you'd be a great addition to this project." Eli knew Dr. Thompson wasn't trying to pressure him. She was simply offering an opportunity that she believed could benefit both him and the department. But Eli also knew that this was another pivotal moment in his career. Was this another chance for him to prove himself, or was it just a distraction from what truly mattered? After ending the call, Eli sat in his office, staring at the papers in front of him. The idea of working on a large-scale research project, collaborating with some of the brightest minds in the world, was incredibly appealing. But he also remembered his recent decision, to focus on the things that brought him joy and fulfillment. He didn't want to lose sight of that. Later that evening, as the sunset painted the sky in hues of pink and orange, Eli sat with Sarah at a cafe near campus, discussing the offer. He appreciated her calm, thoughtful presence, which always helped him make sense of his swirling thoughts. "So, what do you think?" Sarah asked, her voice low and reflective. Eli sighed, taking a sip of his iced tea. "Part of me wants to dive into this project. It's a big deal, international researchers, groundbreaking work. It's the kind of thing that could shape the entire field. But I keep asking myself if it's worth sacrificing the balance I've fought so hard to create. I don't want to get caught up in another whirlwind of obligations." Sarah nodded slowly. "I get it. This is the moment where you have to ask yourself what's more important, the opportunity itself, or what it might cost you. What do you want out of your career, Eli? Is it about making an impact through collaboration, or is it about focusing on teaching and helping students like you've been doing?" Eli looked down at his tea, feeling the weight of the question. In many ways, Sarah had already given him the answer. It wasn't about the fame or the accolades. It was about making a difference where it mattered most, in the lives of his students, in the quiet moments of teaching, and in the discoveries that inspired him every day. The next morning, Eli made his decision. He emailed Dr. Thompson, thanking her for the opportunity and expressing his gratitude for her belief in him. But he politely declined the offer, explaining that he was focused on creating a lasting impact through his teaching and research in a way that didn't require a leadership role in a large-scale project. The decision was liberating. Eli felt a weight lifted off his shoulders, and for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace with where he was in life. It wasn't about taking every opportunity that came his way. It was about creating a life that aligned with his values and his passion for teaching and learning. A few weeks later, Eli received an email that would change everything. It was from Jonah, one of his brightest students, the one he had mentored in his first semester. Jonah had written a paper on an advanced mathematical theory that Eli had introduced to the class, and it had been accepted for publication in a prestigious journal. The email simply read, "Dr. Reed, I wanted to thank you for your guidance this semester. Your support and the way you've pushed me to think differently helped me develop this paper. It's been accepted for publication. I owe a lot of this to you." Eli stared at the email, a mix of emotions flooding him. This was what he had hoped for when he chose to teach, to make a difference, not just in one's knowledge, but in their confidence, their path, and their future. The ripple effect had already begun. Eli had inspired Jonah, and now, Jonah was taking that inspiration and passing it on to the world. Eli smiled to himself, knowing that this was just the beginning. The real triumph was not in the accolades, but in the moments of impact that ripple outward, unseen but powerful. Eli stood at the front of his classroom, staring at the board where the mathematical symbols and formulas were written in neat rows. The students were scattered across the room, some furiously scribbling notes, others sitting back, reflecting. He had been teaching at Harvard for over a decade now, but the excitement he felt each time he walked into a lecture hall had never dulled. There was something magical about it, about being able to share ideas, spark curiosity, and watch his students grow. But today, as he stood there with a quiet, almost reflective air, something was different. This time, he wasn't just thinking about the equations or the lesson plan. He was thinking about what came next, about the long-term impact of his work, not just as a mathematician, but as a teacher. It had been several months since he had turned down the leadership role in the mathematics research group. That decision, which had once seemed so monumental, now felt like a distant memory. Eli had found peace in his work, in the quiet moments spent with his students and the satisfaction of seeing them succeed. His focus had shifted from titles and accolades to the intangible, but irreplaceable, rewards of teaching, the light in a student's eyes when they finally understood a complex concept, the emails from former students who had gone on to do extraordinary things, and, most of all, the knowledge that he had helped shape the next generation of mathematicians, thinkers, and problem solvers. As the lecture wound down, Eli noticed Jonah sitting in the front row, his usual seat. Jonah had grown significantly in the time Eli had known him. From a shy, unsure student to a confident, capable scholar, Jonah had transformed right before Eli's eyes. He had published a paper, earned recognition, and had already begun working on new theories that had the potential to change the way people thought about the subject. When class ended, Jonah stayed behind, as he often did, to chat with Eli. There was a connection between them now, a bond that went beyond teacher and student. Jonah had been one of the first to truly challenge Eli's thinking, forcing him to re-examine his approach to teaching and mentoring. But it was more than that. Jonah had given Eli something he hadn't realized he needed, a reminder of why he had chosen this path in the first place. "Hey, Professor Reed," Jonah said, his voice filled with excitement. "I just wanted to let you know that I've been accepted to a postdoctoral program at MIT. They're offering me a full research position. I don't even know how to express how grateful I am for your support and mentorship over the years. You really pushed me to be better." Eli's heart swelled with pride. Jonah had come so far. He had seen the potential in Jonah from the beginning, but now it was evident to everyone else as well. "Jonah, that's incredible," Eli said, smiling. "I knew you had it in you. You're going to do amazing things. And you've earned it all through hard work and dedication." Jonah shook his head. "I couldn't have done it without you, though. You were the one who showed me how to think critically, how to ask the right questions, how to approach problems with confidence. You've had such a big impact on my life." The words were simple, but they struck Eli deeply. There it was again, the reason he had made the decision to focus on teaching, to put aside the allure of administrative positions and leadership roles. This was the reward. This was the legacy. Jonah's words reminded Eli of something he had been thinking about lately, the ripple effect of teaching. It wasn't about grand gestures or massive achievements. It was about the little moments, the quiet exchanges, the one-on-one guidance that helped students believe in themselves. And as much as Jonah had grown, Eli had grown, too. He had learned to trust his instincts more, to listen more closely, to be patient with his students' progress. As Jonah left the room, Eli felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The world outside of the classroom could be chaotic, filled with distractions and temptations, but here, in this space, Eli had the power to shape lives in the most profound way. Every lecture, every discussion, every student he helped, that was his legacy. Over the next few weeks, Eli continued his teaching as usual, but there was a sense of quiet anticipation in the air. He had received an invitation to give a guest lecture at an international mathematics conference in Europe, a recognition of his work, albeit one he hadn't actively pursued. The invitation, though flattering, felt different now. He wasn't chasing accolades anymore, he was simply being offered opportunities because of the work he had already done. On the day of the conference, Eli stood before a crowd of distinguished mathematicians, researchers, and scholars. As he began his lecture, he realized that this was one of the moments he had longed for when he first started his career. The feeling wasn't one of validation, however. It was a sense of quiet pride, a realization that he had truly found his place. When he finished speaking, the audience applauded, but Eli's mind wasn't on the applause. His mind was on Jonah, on Sarah, and on all of his students, those he had already mentored and those who would come after. This was the real work. This was where his heart was. After the lecture, as he mingled with other speakers and attendees, he was approached by a young mathematician. The woman was eager, bright-eyed, and full of questions. Eli was struck by how much she reminded him of himself when he had been starting out. She wanted to know his thoughts on a certain theory, asking questions with such enthusiasm that Eli felt a renewed sense of purpose. They spent the next hour discussing mathematics, theory, and the future of the field. But as the conversation drew to a close, Eli realized something profound. The cycle was repeating. Just as Jonah had once come to him for guidance, now he was passing on that same mentorship to this young scholar. The process had come full circle. Later that night, as Eli sat alone in his hotel room, reflecting on the day, he realized that this, this connection between teacher and student, was the greatest gift he could give. It wasn't about accolades or recognition. It was about teaching others how to think, how to find their own voice, how to make their own discoveries. And it was about creating a community of learners who would carry that knowledge forward into the future. As Eli looked out the window at the city lights below, he felt at peace. His legacy was no longer just about the work he had done, it was about the work that would continue long after he was gone. The students he had taught, the lessons they had learned, and the ideas they would carry with them would ripple out into the world, shaping it in ways he would never fully understand. But that was enough. The future, Eli knew, was in good hands. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?